never come back.
Hey, Tammy.
I know, I missed that class.
Thank you, Mayor. Let us pray. Dear Lord, we pray your blessings upon this time and all those gathered here today, and we thank you for the opportunity to live and work in this wonderful community. And Father, during this time together as we go about the business of our city, we pray for our elected officials, our city staff, and the community members that we serve. We pray that you give us all a sense of wisdom, justice, and fairness as we all work together to be good stewards of this great community. It's in your most blessed name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Chief. All right, I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Milton City Council for Monday, September 20th, 2021 to order. The city strongly recommends that you review tonight's agenda carefully, and if you wish to speak on any item on the agenda, then please bring your comment card to the city clerk as soon as possible. While the Milton rules allow a speaker to turn in their comment card up until the clerk calls the agenda item, once the agenda item is called, no more comment cards can be accepted. Will the city clerk please call roll and make general announcements?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Be happy to call roll for the September 20th, 2021 regular meeting. I would like to remind those in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. Those attending the meeting who would like to make a public comment, you are required to complete a public comment card prior to speaking on the item. Your comment card must be presented to the city clerk prior to the agenda item being called. All speakers, please identify yourself by name, address, and organization before beginning your comment. If you are representing an organization, you are required to have an affidavit required stating you have the authority to speak on behalf of that organization. Please review tonight's agenda, and if you would like to make a comment, please bring your card to me now. Demonstration of any sort within the chamber is prohibited. Please refrain from any applause, cheering, booing, outburst, or dialogue with any person speaking. Anyone in violation will be asked to leave. As I call roll this evening, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Joe Lockwood.
Here.
Councilmember Peyton Jamison.
Here.
Councilmember Paul Moore.
Here.
Councilmember Laura Bentley.
Here.
Councilmember Carol Crookerly.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Longoria.
Here.
Councilmember Rick Morig.
Here, I think.
Thank you. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Again, good evening, everybody. We appreciate you being here. And with that, I will move on to the city clerk for, please sound the next item.
And that next item, Mayor, is approval of meeting agenda, agenda item number 21278.
Okay, I'm not sure if legally I need to change the agenda or request, but I'd like to. We do have some reports at the end of this meeting, and one being community development, and to recognize and introduce a couple of folks. So if it's okay with the council, I'd like to do that before we move into our regular meeting. But so I'm not sure if I need to make an actual specific on the agenda.
Yeah, if you could make a motion to
Okay.
add that
So
to the
I
agenda.
would like to add, would like to move community development presentation to the beginning of the meeting. So do I have anything else on the agenda?
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Second?
All right, I have a motion for approval from Councilmember Bentley with a second from Councilmember Moore. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Okay, the next item is public comment. Do we have any general public comment?
I do not have any generals.
Okay. I won't bore you with all the rules on general public comment. So if we can move on to the consent agenda, if the city clerk can please sound that item. And
Thank you,
if-
Mayor.
Then if it's okay, after the consent agenda, I'll ask Bob to step up.
Great. Thank you. Our first item is approval of the September 8th, 2021 City Council meeting minutes. It's agenda item number 21279. Second is approval of the professional services agreement between the City of Milton and Malden and Jenkins LLC for single auditing and advisory services related to federal awards. Agenda item number 21280. Our third item, approval of an agreement between the City of Milton and New Providence LLC regarding event sponsorship, including use of. Our fourth item, approval of a professional services agreement with Pond and Company to provide engineering design services and construction administration for Morris Road widening. Agenda item number 21282. Next, approval of a facilities, trails, and parks maintenance agreement between the City of Milton and Triscapes, Inc. to provide facility landscaping services, sport fields maintenance, and park and trail maintenance services. Agenda item number 21, with Pond and Company to provide City T-Splosh Batch 1 design services for Hopewell Road at Bethany Bend, Bethany Way intersection project. Agenda item number 21284. Our seventh item, approval of a professional services agreement between the City of Milton and Heath and Lineback Engineers, Inc. for bridge inspection and assessment of new Bullpen Road Bridge over Little River. Agenda item number 21285. Our next item, approval of a professional services agreement with Geologic LLC for Lackey Road Dam inspection services and maintenance recommendations at the Lackey Road Green Space property. It's agenda item number 21286. Next is an approval of a janitorial service. 7. Our 10th item, approval of a change order number 1 with Ashford Gardeners for the right-of-way and passive park field mowing agreement. Agenda item number 21288. Our next item, approval of a traffic signal maintenance agreement between the City of Milton and GPG Traffic Signals LLC. And our 12th item, approval of a goods and services purchase contract with Galls LLC for the provision of uniforms and related apparel for Milton Fire Rescue. Agenda item number 21290. Our final consent item, approval of a subdivision plats and revisions. The name of the development is Deer Haven Preserve. It's located at 15060 Freemanville Road. It's land lot 554 and 555, District 2, Section 2. It's a revision to the final plat, and the plat does supersede previously recorded plat in Plat Book 434, page 22. Plat is revised to add one 2.09 acre lot for a total of 9 lots and delineate 2.84 acres as a natural conservation area. It is a total of 25.02 acres with a density of 0.36 lots per acre. It's agenda item number 21291. Mayor Lockwood?
Okay, do I have a motion on the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we accept the consent agenda as read.
Okay, do I have a second? All right, I have a motion from Councilmember Morrig with a second from Councilmember Longoria for approval. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. And before we move into reports and presentations, I'd like to ask Bob Buscemi to step up for a minute.
Mayor, Council, I just wanted to introduce 2 new staff members. Jerry, if you want to come up quick. Jerry actually was working with the department for many months through Low Engineering, and we picked him up full-time. We've expanded his services to include transportation reviews and actual physical site work. He does all our stormwater management reviews. Jerry, you want to just introduce yourself quick?
Oh, yeah. Jerry Oberholzer, 1855 Penny Stone Way, Snellville, Georgia. I'm Usually when I'm coming in front of the council, it's on a zoning matter. So I apologize. Sorry. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to come here. I've actually been working in Milton doing reviews now for almost 2 years. So I really look forward to the opportunity to come on board, expand what we're doing, going to be helping out with that. Thank you. I want to thank the city manager and Bob for the opportunity. And I've been doing this for about 40 years. So look forward to spending another 40 years. Thank you.
Well, I would say, Jerry, welcome here, and you must have started when you were about 2 or 3, and got a good pre-trial period with you here too. But congratulations coming on.
It's probably the
soon.
longest probation period I've ever had. But thank you.
Jerry is also a recovering mayor.
And we put him to work.
We'll have to talk.
And the other staff I just wanted to introduce was Ron. He's our new plan examiner for the building department. And I can promise you, after 3 months of doing them, he's really welcome on board. The nice part, Ron has worked every weekend since he started and has caught us up. We are, I can honestly say we're up to date on all our reviews and inspections. Building department's fully functioning and running well. So that's a really nice thing, and it's really a lot of his credit. We've been really working hard to get that up there. So Ron, do you want to come up quick?
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Ron Haney, and I've been doing building department work since about 2000, and I've worked in Johns Creek, the city of Atlanta, Sandy Springs, most recently Park City, Utah, and I'm very pleased to be here in Milton. I'm grateful to Tracy and Bob for hiring me on, and I can't say enough about the staff that they've developed that I get the opportunity to work with. The permit techs and the inspectors are excellent. They're go-getters. They're not afraid. They're out there taking on all the challenges that have been thrown at them. So kudos to them.
Well, welcome aboard, Ron. So
Thank
we're glad
you.
to
I
have you here.
appreciate it very much.
Now you guys see why we moved it forward. To be fair to them. All right, we'll move on to reports and presentations. Tammy, if you'll please call the item.
Thank you, Mayor. That first item is proclamation recognizing Constitution Week presented to the Daughters of the American Revolution, Patriots of Liberty chapter. Mayor?
Okay, it's an honor to present this proclamation recognizing Constitution Week 2021. Whereas Constitution of the United States, the guardian of our liberties, is a product of reflection and choice, embodying the principles of limited government and a republic dedicated to rule by law, not by men. And whereas September 17th, 2021 marks the 234th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America by the Constitutional Convention. And whereas it is fitting and proper to accord official recognition to this memorable anniversary and to the patriotic exercises that will commemorate the occasion. And whereas Public Law 915 guarantees the issue of a proclamation each year by the President of the United States of America designating September 17th through September 23rd as Constitution Week. Constitution Week, we, the City of Milton, urge all citizens to study the Constitution and express gratitude for the privilege of American citizenship in our republic, functioning under the superb body of laws, the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, therefore, we, the Mayor and the City Council of the City of Milton, proclaim the week of September 17th, 2021 through September 23rd, 2021 as Constitution Week in the City of Milton, and ask our citizens to reaffirm the ideals the framers of the Constitution had in 1787. And this is presented to the Patriots of Liberty chapter of the National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution. And this is given under our hand and seal of the City of Milton, Georgia on the 20th day of September, 2021. And if council would join me in presenting this to the Daughters of the American Revolution. It's also an honor to have the Sons of the American Revolution with us tonight. And Tammy, if you'd please call this item.
That next item is presentation from the Sons of the American Revolution honoring Milton Police Chief, Chief Rich Austin, presented by Mr. Alan Finley.
Glad to be back here at Lockwood City Hall. My name is Al Finley. I am a member of the National Sons of the American Revolution, who traces our ancestors back to the Revolutionary War, and they provided services to the formation of this country. And on behalf of the Piedmont chapter here, the local chapter, I'd like to honor your police chief. And if he will come forward, please. Let me give you this proclamation, and let me read it. Whereas Richard Austin has served as the chief of the Milton Chief of Police since 2017, and Chief Austin was an effective leader of the city of Milton. And whereas Chief Austin steered the department through COVID-19 pandemic and created a Chiefs Advisory Board to solicit valuable viewpoints from community leaders, and as Chief Austin revamped Milton's many policy, including use of force, and whereas Chief Austin is a strong advocate for training that utilizes technologies that give officers tools to be more effective, and whereas Chief Austin took steps to enhance professionalism that led to the Milton Police Department earning national CALEA recognition, and therefore the Piedmont chapter, Sons of the American Revolution, along with the city of Milton, commends Chief Austin for his significant service on this 20th day of September in the year 2021. Al Finley, President. And here is a certificate that is for you. And if you would be honored to wear these medals on behalf of the National Society.
Really appreciate that. I'd really like to thank the members of the Sons of the American Revolution for this honor. This recognition is very humbling, indeed. As I often tell folks, it's an honor and a privilege to serve this great community in this great department in this wonderful city. It's great because we have a great deal of support from our citizens, our elected officials, and our fellow city staff members. I certainly know of no leader who's ever met with any significant success who did so without a team of dedicated individuals who are committed to the organization's mission, vision, and values. From our officers, our civilian staff, to our command staff, many of them who are here tonight, I thank each and every one of them. I thank them for their hard work, their sacrifice, and their dedication to this community. They're truly an exceptional group of men and women, and I count it a privilege to lead them and a privilege to serve this great city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And I'm going to suggest in a minute, maybe after this picture, that we get Chief and the Sons of the American Revolution, as well as some of the other leaders in the police department, to step up here to get a picture, and council can stand up behind here. So yeah. Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. Thank you for being here, doing that. Thank you so much.
Gentlemen?
Quality, not quantity, right?
Mulvey, you want to take the picture? Thanks for all that you guys do. Appreciate it. Cheers. Thanks. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you doing this. Okay, Tammy, if you would please call the next presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. That next presentation is presentation of staff recommendations related to Chapter 4. Ms. Bernadette Harville.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This evening, we are going to be discussing Chapter 4 in general, not specific to any one item, and discuss some of the content that we've seen that maybe needs some further clarifications to ensure that we are honoring the intents of the council, as well as addressing any of the concerns that have recently come up. This other presentation really wants to be seen first, so give me one moment. Okay, so there was our agenda for this evening. See if I think I'm on a little delay here. There we go. So we're going to start this Chapter 4 licenses, which are currently authorized. We're going to talk about staff recommendations for administrative changes, staff recommendations for upset and staff recommendations to each license type that we've encountered. And then we'll cover any questions or additional council feedback. I'm going to stop slide by slide to kind of have a moving discussion about where we are, because it's a lot of information. And instead of waiting to the end to hear all the feedback, I think it would be pertinent to be able to stop and hear what you have to say about each type. And then staff is going to go back to the drawing board and address any of the concerns you have in a future amendment that will bring to council to that ordinance. So tonight's just about a discussion to see where the direction of council is. Again, before preparing this presentation, I've met with the police department representatives, community development, finance staff, as well as some of the event staff to kind of get to these areas of topics that we've had questions about. So we went over the purposes to clarify the language within Chapter 4 and potentially Chapter 64 to address actual intentions of the council and address any concerns that council has expressed in recent meetings. So we're going to start with, this is our current license types that are allowed. We have off-premise retail package. So anytime you see off-premise currently, it's typically associated with a retail package sales to go. We have on-premise licenses, which is typically what you see as consumption by the drink at the establishment. Underneath that, we have standard as well as limited. We have different types that fall under each one of those. We have our manufacturer licenses in the city. Breweries and distilleries, you may see them just referred to as breweries by the state. We define them specifically. Brewers would be your beer and wine. Distilleries would be your distilled spirits. Micro just means they're manufacturing smaller quantities. They have a reduced fee that they pay the city to have those. It's nothing different in what they're actually doing other than less quantities. Hybrid licenses, those are the manufactured and consumption and retail sales typically. So a brew pub would be an eating establishment that also manufactures on site. A farm winery license has the consumption, the wholesale, and the off-premise sales as well. And then we have our add-on and specialty licenses. So those are for Sunday sales, doing catering off-premises from our package sales, craft beer and wine markets, crowlers and growlers, ancillary. And we're going to kind of go through each of these, get the feedback, and really try to clean this up to be a little simpler from an administrative standpoint, to kind of to the crux of what we're wanting to see within the city, and then maybe make a few license types that fit these as opposed to having all of these different categories. So starting out with our recommended administrative changes or requests for feedback on those changes. I'm talking about reintroducing the advertising requirements. In the past, we had advertising requirements. Every time there was a license before you, that establishment had to put in the newspaper for 2 weeks, this particular ad that let the public know what type of alcohol they'd be wanting to serve, where they'd be serving it, and that they were coming before council on a particular day and time that the community could give their feedback on how they felt about that establishment being located in that specific place. In addition to the paper, the newspaper requirement, we also had the public notice outside of the establishment, so when you drove by, you could see it. So maybe you don't get the Milton Herald, you'd be able to drive by and see something was going on with those big standard signs that we see out there. Also letting them know who is going to be doing the sales and what day and time they'd be before council, so if anyone wanted to come give feedback. So that was removed back, I believe, in 2018. And so we're looking to see if you guys would be interested in reintroducing that and requiring that once again for all of the different types of alcohol licenses.
Would that be for new or change license?
Correct.
Not for renewals if.
Absolutely correct.
Okay.
We'll go with the standard assumption that once it's approved, unless something else changes and makes them have to come before you, that renewal will be a standard administrative function. Neighboring jurisdictions starting to remove it, and so Sarah, in her quest to make things from the economic development perspective a little easier on the businesses and consistent with the neighboring communities, had brought that before you in 2018.
Okay.
So I strongly support this as far as going back to it, especially with all of our changes to Chapter 4, our Crabapple and Deerfield districts with residential areas close by, especially with the farm winery. I feel like that sign on a tree in front of, we would have probably gotten a lot of really good feedback prior to instead of after and during. So I strongly support reentering the public notification requirement.
Okay.
Same here.
Absolutely. Okay, so if there's not any opposition, we'll just go ahead and kind of in the next round of edits, we'll bring that forth to you. So the next item we have from an administrative standpoint is the definition really, or the understanding of what a liquor selling establishment is. Chapter 64 has warrant requirements, and in the Deerfield and Crabapple form-based code, under certain zoning sections, there is a requirement for a warrant for liquor selling establishments. That team has always interpreted that as liquor selling establishments. Again, a warrant would be that administrative, kind of the use conditions that the administrative end can put on it. We are to now bring them before council as well for council feedback. You would be able to have further restrictions on maybe hours of sales, what else they could do within that store or establishment other than just serving and selling alcohol. And we just wanted to know if you intended it for it to be packaged off premise, or would you like it to see it being both?
Bernadette,
Laura?
I have a comment. So with a warrant, you would have, that would be through the community development director.
Correct. A warrant is administratively done through community development. We've been bringing them to council as an extra step.
So with that comes his expertise on developing a community and having a certain mix of uses within, you know, he would see if we were getting applications for, I don't know, 5 brew pubs
Yeah, too
in
much.
a row. And he would have the discretion to say, council, here's what I'm seeing. Just as we have done with other ordinances that are new, like tree ordinance. We said, hey, we see a problem here. Let's intervene and let's fix it. So
Absolutely.
I would support the warrant process for on and off premise.
Thank you for the clarification. Yes, sir.
Can we just clarify? So if it's warrant, and then the final decision resides with the Director of Community Development. So it's really just an advising of council, the intent of the direction that the Director of Community Development is going to take.
Correct. And Bob Buscemi has been using it as an opportunity to also bring these concepts before you to get some feedback.
Yeah, with that clarification, I also support what you're going to do for both.
Everybody else good
And
with that?
then I just kind of had a question about maybe having a blanket statement about, I've seen it in some other ordinances as we've been doing this research, prohibiting sales of certain types of products or activities within anywhere that sells liquor. So instead of it needing to be listed it could be, so if we did the warrant route, we could have maybe a boilerplate warrant that restricted all of these things, and then we could tailor them, or we could just put into the ordinance itself, you cannot do these things if you're selling liquor.
Yeah, the list that you included was pretty comprehensive, and there wasn't anything on that list that I would say needs to come off. the list. I think it's a good list, and there may be other things that we'll explore in the future. And I think it should be just a standard boilerplate, that it does not need to be considered on a one-off basis.
Bernadette, can you add fireworks?
Good point.
I certainly can.
I'm just kidding, but yeah, the list, I thought it was good.
Bernadette, are there any, I didn't mind the language or the items that were in that list. Are any of those things done today? And so would us approving this list change behavior that exists in some of our establishments today?
Not ours, but we have seen this at other neighboring jurisdictions where you can go and have these things occur. And we were like, maybe this is something I want to mention. We are not allowing, if that was your vision. So while we only have a few liquor selling establishments here, they don't do this. I could see a package store may have also tobacco products, CBD products, and vape
Right.
products.
That was probably the one that I was most worried about, because it wouldn't be unusual, I think, for a liquor store to sell cigarettes as well, or some other kind of tobacco. We already outlawed vaping type products, so I wasn't worried about that. The CBD thing, I'm still confused over where that's headed, but
So we can go back to the drawing board and tailor this list a little better. But typically we would see it just, maybe we're thinking when you walk in, you're just getting your liquor at this store and it's not becoming / convenience and other kinds of things. No.
well, my concern is changing something that could be some type of a revenue generator for an existing business.
Correct. We will research all that specifically before bringing any changes. And again, typically we're seeing these types of products maybe at a convenience store where they're not selling liquor. Liquor is typically in our package stores where we're not seeing this currently, but I will vet that out before we.
Okay.
Everything we go over this evening will be vetted, and I will mention if there will be a business that I do know of that it may impact.
Okay.
Or a pending application. So I'll try to mention all of those for you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we'll look at that and creating some language that, and we'll take into consideration some of the ones that may not be a concern to everybody. So then we had this section about alcohol consumption near retail package stores. This language currently is the attempt is to make sure.
Excuse me, yeah, can we get her?
Give me 1 second.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So currently, this language is talking about not being able to leave the liquor store and open what you just bought there right outside the store. We also have this doubled up again in the open container districts, specifying what kind of containers those types of drinks can be in, and that you have to get them at a retailer, such as a eating establishment, in those 16-ounce cups and things like that. So we just wanted to reiterate some clarification that there was that exception for the open container districts, specific to those outlined things that you still cannot open up your drinks that you bought at the package store outside. So we're just looking to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we can clarify those things to make the police enforcement a little more clearer. I want to hopefully, okay. So moving on, so we're out of the administrative and kind of moving on to the definitions. And we'll go through these one by one. I've been working with legal adjacent. That term comes up several times throughout our ordinance. So this is kind of a guidance that we're getting, and we may have to change that word or use it differently, as looking at adjacent meaning the abutting or bordering vicinity of a structure or boundary not to exceed beyond 20 feet from the approved structure or boundary in any direction. This is where we kind of talk about those tasting rooms that you may see at a farm winery and talking about where the consumption could occur, your patio sales for these types of places, and talking about making sure that the definitions are tailored specific to those different organizations and where you wouldn't be able to leave the building that serves you like that and have people walk around and not be kind of on top of each other.
So Bernadette, when we were discussing some of those distances within the more recent case, more commonplace, is that the reason for our moving to 20?
That number is what we settled on when we kind of assessed where we thought a patio space would be. We could like.
I don't think it's something that you need to fall on our sword.
We kind of measured it ourselves with the walking and then felt like.
I think 20 is probably just fine. I just wanted to, it is consistent with some of the surrounding communities based on the information you provided to us.
I don't know that we're seeing this defined that specifically anywhere. We are looking as a Milton clarification to have this defined. So that is not one I've seen, and I can look further, but I've not seen it by the feet like that other places.
I think, I read it in the information you provided to us, either in Johns Creek and or Alpharetta.
I'll have to go back and check again to make sure. I apologize that offhand I'm not remembering the feet.
But 20 doesn't seem unreasonable.
And so on the next one, alcoholic beverage caterers, we're just looking to clean this up and clarify a little better. So what this is anytime someone wants to serve the alcohol that they're allowed to serve on premise, off premise at an event. We're looking, some sections said that you could be a on-premise retailer or an off-premise retailer. And we're just looking to clarify that they can be either or in the definition, cleaning up the definition to address things that are said later in the ordinance. So that would mean someone who had a package store, or we have some large properties that have public functions they don't impact us at the level to become a special event. So they kind of fall in this nether region where they can't currently because they're not a private function, a private property, or a special event. So we're looking to see, based on the feedback, if we can have, then we'd have the tailored catered event permit one that the city would have to approve to authorize that event, but it just wouldn't be to the level of going to zoning, police, fire, public works for a special event. And city-sponsored events, our own events we throw, we just wanted to clarify that every one of those would have to have licensed caterers serving at them.
Burnett, is one of the clarifications there, or one of the hurdles, the fact that it is liquor for sale at the catered event, or if it's liquor that is being offered at a private event but does not rise to the occasion of a special event? No issue there, correct?
They are still, a private event on private property is still supposed to get a permit from the city to serve there.
Okay. Regardless of whether the liquor is for sale or for free.
So the definition says serving, the selling includes serving, offering, and those types of things. So,
Okay.
and I can do something where we clarify what a private function on private property means. So maybe it's like not your friends gathering for dinner, right? So we can further clarify that and make sure through legal, if it.
A charitable event. And then there wouldn't necessarily be a fee. There would be your contribution to the cause. And if alcohol is included, the reason I'm just asking for clarification is I want to make sure if it's something sizable that the city has a chance to weigh in.
Okay, absolutely. So I will take that feedback into consideration to make sure we tailor that specifically to ensure that we are capturing the events that we would be concerned about.
Yep, thank you.
But Bernadette, it excludes all private parties, correct? Because there's nothing being sold.
Well, that's what we're saying is,
That's where we're blurring the line there.
Yeah.
so I would have to make it very clear. So I will go back and ensure that we're not overstepping into people's
Right.
private realms,
Right.
but
Right.
capturing somehow if it's for some type of event that's typically your charitable events would be open to public, but you can have closed ones. So I will work with legal to ensure that we're trying to capture that fine line between your own party and this type of thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. This is where it gets very, and so when people come to apply, it's very complex. So we want to make sure we're very clear. On the bring your own beverage, it currently allows two circumstances. So bring your own beverage is when you have an establishment and someone can bring their own alcohol in. They open it, consume it. It's not the establishment doing that. Think of your paint and sip places. So our ordinance also allows for, in certain sections, an eating establishment to also have that. I'm not sure that currently holds a consumption on premise license. I'm not sure typically why, if you already sell your own alcohol, you'd want someone else to bring their alcohol, but it is what it is allowed. Just clarifying, we still want to continue that. And if so, I just need to clean up the definition to make sure that it's understood that it's for either type of establishment. And I'm going to go through the ordinance and clean it up because it shows up like 5 times to explain these differences. And I just want to kind of pile it into one section and clarify what's allowed and the hours that would be allowed at each type of establishment. Should you still be behind it being at both a place that has no liquor selling capabilities?
The BYO is beer and only, and you're using the word alcohol in your description just now. That's not intended to be wine, or not
In
intended to
its
be
section, it
spirits.
is clearly defined. There is
Yeah.
one caveat that has some allowance for liquor, and we're removing it. When there was something about a party being so large, and we're just, the intent was beer and wine only originally. We're cleaning it up to make sure it meant beer and wine only.
Okay.
We just want to make sure that you're okay with having them at establishments that are, AR Workshops is one of our examples. They don't have any other liquor license or alcohol license, and they have this one. Matilda's has this one as well. We couldn't find on the record anyone that was a on-premise consumption license holder that had it. So we offer it, but I don't, like again, I said, I don't know that any of these restaurants would want to let you bring in your own when they're trying to sell it to you.
Yeah, there are some times where like a steakhouse will let you bring in your own wine. And
Okay,
they-
so
they-
that's
they
maybe
uncork
exactly why
it.
we have that in there.
Okay.
Really, this is 2 simple fixes. It defines the word as events facility and then continues to refer to it as a special events facility. I just want to clarify that those mean the same thing. And also, under Chapter 64, prior to having rural or agricultural facilities, we had a conditional use permit for these festivals or events, outdoor, indoor conditional use permits. So we are having some establishments that don't technically have the rural or agricultural event facility permit that may be of consideration just by the timing in which they got there, is that if you'd like to allow them to be special event facilities, we'd like to clean up that language to allow them to have that opportunity as well. We have a particular property, I don't know if Bob has the address or anything that we need to give out, but that there has this older conditional use permit provided by council that in today's timeline would have been a rural or agricultural event facility. Instead of having them come back and get the new conditional use permit, just if you want to. When we bring the ordinance revisions forward, we will bring maybe a list of the properties so it'll be clearer, so there won't be any kind of confusion about that, but I just want to make sure that if we're going in that direction. Moving on to some of the other definitions we have a freestanding vendor definition. It was kind of a little more open than I think staff had contemplated. It was talking about allowing these kiosks, carts, and temporary structures to sell alcohol within any of the open container districts, special events. We're looking to tailor that a little more and say that you have to be at a permitted catered event, special event, or city-sponsored event. So then you wouldn't have a kiosk pop up in a parking lot, because our open container districts are basically all of our commercial districts. So we don't foresee anyone wanting a kiosk popping up maybe in the parking lot of one of these establishments. So we kind of tailored that back to having it at events only. So those are your temporary, these new things we're seeing is like a lot of these little carts that have beer taps on the back, things like that.
So that would be similar to Crab Apple Fest, where the city is involved. Someone already has a license. They could in fact then serve and have a beer truck
A
come
beer
in.
moped we've seen, yes.
Okay. I'm just thinking of events in the past that we've had right in this area, in the business district.
And now we need a JUPIN on the definitions of these special events and kind of clarifying and bringing some exceptions to normal rules to events that are permitted. So this would be one of those, allowing freestanding vendors at a special event. There are bartenders that are allowed in other jurisdictions. Since we don't have bars or bartenders, we would correlate this right back to having to have a caterer license. You'd have to have that off-premise catered license from your home jurisdiction or Milton to be able to do this.
Bernadette, just clarify that what you just said. So a bartender.
Establishment, unless you want to give us guidance to look into that from a legal perspective, the vision we had was that these licensed establishments that have paid and vetted for the off-premise catering licenses would be able to then come up in any type of vehicle, basically, or setup to serve from.
But their servers in a roll-up truck or cart would require a pour license?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
yes, and a caveat in state law is anyone serving through these catering licenses has to be 21. So you could be 18 in the store, but you have to be 21 off premise. So we kind of have all those rules that we have vetted as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Under the Georgia Farm Winery, we were looking to just add a little sentence that explained for anyone applying that they would need to be in compliance with all provisions of Chapter 64. So should council want that to be by right or by conditional use permit or anything else in the future, that they just know when they come in to apply for alcohol, that it's just clear that they have to also be in compliance there first. So then we don't have any confusion over that.
I would add, okay, so every year they have to reapply and that they must also be in compliance with the state and federal
I have an
requirements.
entire section,
Okay.
a few slides later about farm wineries, and it specifically goes into that. And I will cover that again in a moment. And it requires them showing the current and as well as the renewed
Okay.
in January. So it's a
And
little
they
different.
provide all that information. We don't have to go search
Correct.
for it. It's
We will set up
provided.
an administrative process to ensure that we're checking in, but it wouldn't be our responsibility to go search.
Okay.
Absolutely. So yes, I will come right back to that.
Well, Bernadette, excuse me, before we leave farm winery, and I don't know that this is covered elsewhere, when we talk about tastings and also for sale, is it treated just like a bar in that if you see somebody who's visibly intoxicated, are there any limitations on how many tastings you can have or how much you can buy?
So
At a farm-
tastings are restricted. Consumption on premise is a little different. We can talk about adding those restrictions in. We haven't to this point. So it would be the normal standard Georgia laws that they do have regarding visibly intoxicated people. There are laws about that are standard. Milton doesn't have any additional restrictions, if that's
So
clear.
Bernadette, where did I read in the process? Was it in this presentation where beer was like up to?
Yes, when we get
Okay.
into the actual, so I have, these are just the definition section, and then I break these down later into the actual tastings
I
and
remember
farm
something like
wineries
that. Okay.
and things like that. And we
Different
go
for
into
beer and wine than
specific
it
things.
is
Yeah.
for spirits.
I
It's
just
like
don't-
2 ounces.
And we
of
have a little
spirits
bit of, I
and-
need a little feedback from the farm winery, brewery, distillery section. So when we get there, we'll kind of go into that. I have proposed separating those from the package stores in the ancillary section. So we'll get into that.
Okay.
I've also, so here you'll start seeing the tasting rooms. So I'm asking to clarify tastings that occur on winery property versus tastings that occur in these brewers and distillers by calling it a tasting room at the winery. So we always know every time you hear tasting room, you're referring to a winery. And if you hear tap room, we're referring to the establishments that do the brewing and manufacturing from the breweries, distilleries section, the brew pubs, because it's just going to be clear for staff to understand what would be allowed at that point.
The bridge off from what Carol said. So if you had people who actually are serving flights, or they're actually serving glasses of wine or whatever, are they required to have a pour license? Do they need to be fingerprinted and all that other thing?
Yes.
The same restrictions we have for restaurants?
Absolutely.
workers?
Everyone in the city who is a manager, owner, partner in the business has to have a background check. And then in addition, which is kind of already giving you the pour license for that year. And then the pourers who just work have to have it, and theirs are good for 2 years.
Okay, so that way you're doing background checks and making sure you know who actually.
Absolutely.
That would help also to understand.
I believe it
what's
spells out
intoxication.
handling, ringing up, like everything to do with alcohol. I think even if you're I can make sure it still does. The old ordinance had it to the specification that even if you were doing the ringing up in the cash register for alcohol, you had to have that license.
Okay, and I think that makes sense, because then people who actually are pouring, if we're going to talk about making sure people aren't intoxicated or too far gone, you've got people that actually have been trained and
Absolutely.
certified.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So just clarifying again that the tap room is for those tastings that are on premise with the distilleries and breweries, and then defining what a flight tasting is. And basically I just tied those quantities right back into what our current license allows, which is the 2-ounce samples and then 4 total for 8 ounces of beer or wine. And then the liquors for 1/2-ounce samples for 2 ounces. I'm looking into whether or not the state changed it from having one type of consumption allowed at a time and not having these proportional combinations. So if I may just strike the proportional combinations and say you can only have the one type of alcohol if the state has that.
Are you gonna cover a little bit further ancillary uses and how that ties into all of this?
Absolutely. And I
Okay,
have
thank you.
some recommendations that I'm going to get your feedback on
Great,
regarding.
Thank you.
So is everyone good with these definition directions? Okay. So here we're moving on now to the license type. So now we're going to get into kind of this type by type. So everyone get ready. It's quite a bit of information. So I just try to start with our standard consumption on premises. This is your beer, wine, liquor license that you can consume. We're calling it standard. Currently, I believe we have a few mixed uses within that category that should be in the limited section. So we're proposing to clean it up and go back to standard, meeting those things we always assumed were standard. Your eating establishments that are 50/50, your hotels, your private clubs, sports clubs, golf courses should be in there as well. So things like that, just as having the old standard. Anything that was currently under that definition that has restricted quantities of food or restricted hours or retail space, to just move them to the limited and make it clearer for staff administering it. Also talking about adding a definition for the senior facilities. They don't quite fit under most of these, so they're not really private. They're open to the public, and kind of getting them into compliance from a perspective of them being able to serve alcohol at their establishments. We're looking, if you are okay with those types of sales, to include a definition and a category for them as well. So here are some of the categories that were under the standard consumption, or are under the standard consumption in our current ordinance, that we're looking to move to limited. I have some of these in much more detail in a moment, but city food markets are basically your craft beer and wine markets without the off-premise sales, without the package part. So these are mini grocery stores is what when you read the definition, it is basically you have to have a certain number of sales, a certain square footage, and they're larger than most of our spaces that are here. So we can either talk about combining them and making one limited license for establishments that have prepared food and meals and groceries, and whether or not they do package retail or not in the future changes, and just kind of striking all these individual definitions. or keeping it that way and keeping it with these very strict things that we may only see pop up in the future because they were so much larger than really fit in our downtown currently. They may fit in some other establishments that they start building out. So that's that city food market. Then you have your freestanding vendors. We've already talked about them, the little mobile units. We're looking at just putting them with they're currently under that standard. I just want to strike them from standard and make them only for the events, the approved events. Food hall cafes. I have an entire slide on them to explain what they are. I just need some feedback on whether or not this is still of interest. And if so, some recommendations on if we want to put them under that limited consumption. So these are very specifically defined establishments. And the way I liken them is, I call it like a food court in the mall. So you'd have a bunch of places within that same area that had food, and they have to be contiguous, and you can see they have to be so many % of the area is dedicated to food and this and that, but they would team up. So your alcohol place, maybe your tap place, teaming up, and they couldn't do multiples. So if you had a larger establishment wanting to come into one of our redesigned areas and do something like this, would we still be for this? And then I'll go and clean it up a little more to make sure that we're okay, and I'd make it limited. We would propose that because they're not actual purveyors of the food, maybe to do that 10 o'clock closing, or maybe do a midnight closing instead of 2 a.m.
It's under one roof.
In this
But there's
particular
multiple
one,
kiosks
it
in the
is
roof.
one shared, it has a shared common area. This is a little different than a roof. I want to talk about that in a moment. I'm going to go into that in one moment. Don't lose me on that one. But this one is about, when you read the Food Hall Cafe, they're the location within this common shared area. I would like to clean up the definition a little more, but what I'm seeing is I would think like a food court. Are you comfortable, I guess, with the idea that if they had a shared courtyard?
Can you give
But the
us an
re-
example
I'm
of that?
thinking Avalon in my mind.
I was actually thinking something like Pond City Market.
Okay.
That's exactly what I was trying to.
So,
think
and I know
about.
Sarah
So-
went through these and had specific images. We need to clear it up a little more for what would be potentially possible here. But yes, exactly. So I've not been to Ponds, but I was thinking more like similar, potentially could be like an Avalon. We have a courtyard one in a minute that sounds very similar, so I'm gonna go over that one as well. But basically, I'm gonna clarify it a little better to not have all these specific definitions, but just saying that you could team up with if you were contiguous. So we've seen this request from other places, but we want to define where are you comfortable with potentially teaming up food from another establishment with a drinking place that stands alone.
So are you envisioning, is this something, I mean, the magnitude of this, is this like one in Crabapple, or is it, I mean,
I wouldn't say it really, this particular definition of a food hall would fit in here. It would be a tract of businesses that are all contiguous, sharing an internal shared space to eat at. That's how I'm seeing this.
It would be
It-
I'm sorry.
Excuse me, individual licenses. So we're just,
Right.
you're just asking whether we care if they share common consumption area?
Right.
Okay.
And we've seen that we do have a current one that's down here in Crabapple, and then we were talking about in that circumstance, are we okay if they're in the same premise? So that'd be inside the same building. So currently we have these rules that make it sound like the establishment itself, the licensed establishment needs to have these 50-50, 70-30, 60-40 ratios. Are we comfortable with if it's all in the same entrance and enclosed in the same building to have shared sales? So maybe this particular business isn't versed in selling food, but they can team up with someone that is. Are you comfortable with allowing, as long as they're in that same building, them counting their food ratios as part of their overall sales for the premise?
So when you say same building, Brenda, that could be food on the first floor, bar on the second floor.
Well, in my mind, we have to talk about tailoring it properly to avoid the things you don't want. But I'm thinking about when you walk into, like Kathleen's Catch right now shares a space. They are considered two separate ones. Would you be comfortable in that particular instance to consider their sales
Right.
together? Or should he want to do something different than what he's currently doing?
Right, that's different. But with your description a moment ago of it being a building, you
Yeah, the
could have what I
premise.
just described, which would not, in my mind, would not be acceptable to me.
Could you, and I see your point, Paul, but in reality, the whole reason for this is, you want to have not just alcohol consumption and just a bar,
Right.
but have food consumption,
Yep.
then but some days now people are separating those out, and maybe the business supplying the alcohol, they hire somebody else
Yeah.
to do the food, which you get the same net
But-
result. But to your point, somebody had a two-story building and said, well, we're doing a bar here and food up here, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah.
They could have different hours of operation. They
But
could
I'm
have
wondering if
different staff.
you could probably tailor that to have to be in the same area
Mhm.
or something.
The same
To make that
suite,
the same
maybe?
area. You can't separate them.
Yeah, that
Are
I,
they paying different, are they do they have separate leases?
I can
Well,
tailor it
Kathleen's
to however
probably-
you'd
Well,
like.
if they have separate leases, then that's
not gonna work.
problematic.
Yeah, you could probably monitor more by, it'd be a master lease, and then it would just be a business agreement.
There'd be
between the
subleases
vendor.
under a master
Mhm.
lease.
But if you have to go over here for food and over here for liquor, you're creating a bar. I mean, I don't know what else to say. So I think, I mean, it kind of feels like we're getting close to a Nixon here.
I mean, I personally, I don't have a problem with it as long as they're somehow tied together to where if the eating establishment goes, well, the alcohol establishment goes too.
Unless they replace one within so
Right,
many
yeah, well,
days.
like we had talked about that, is that the other requirement is you have to have the food service here too. Now, if you know, for 3 years have a barbecue restaurant in there with it, but then you decide to change it to something else, you can do that, but you have to have that, you have to have the food
Well,
part of the business.
But the difference is, we're saying what you have to have. What does the patron have to do? Does the patron have to buy food? Because if the patron doesn't have to buy food and they can have, yeah, they can just buy liquor, then, yeah,
But this is
correct,
like
it's
going to a restaurant.
unenforceable.
You don't have, you know, you can buy one or the other in a restaurant too, or a bar.
But who does then the justification to see if, at the end of the day, between the different establishments, I just think it's getting very complicated. Somebody has got to look and see how much food, what is the percentage of food sold? And then,
We would do these ratios within the establishment, and then they would have to turn in receipts, and we can look at having, a company that actually would go in and audit these types of licenses then. at
Do
that
we
point.
have someone actively going to do a food hall right now?
No. These are some of the concepts that the last drive of recruiting businesses had brought in. We did have one at that time that, if you go back to listen to Sarah's presentation, she mentions one that was, and I don't know what happened to why it didn't, but she mentions one, I believe, that was going to come in.
well, I'm personally not in favor of something that creates overhead for us to have to go and monitor at that length. And then I think it creates problems down the line is if one goes out of business and then.
So this
This is
particular one is a little different because of the way it's defined, and I'm not finding many of the things here that are qualifying.
Okay.
The brewery that has the shared courtyard and things could potentially fall under this if we tweaked it a little bit. With them, we were just talking about in general. So we have brewery and distillery that came in and applied. I have the owner here to speak if anyone, at the end, if he has put in a comment card. And so originally, when he first came in with this concept, we only allowed this type of manufacturing in T5. So they did all their architectural design, and everything to put all the equipment in the T5 building, and they have 2 buildings. And then council approved it to be also in T4 open, which his other building right next door happens to be in that zoning district. The concept was already being built, so now he's trying to figure out what he can do with his other building, because he originally thought that he'd be able to brew here and have them go over and consume next door as one premise, because the federal government defines that as a premise, but our premise is within that building. So if we were to allow these concepts, we'd have to either tweak the definition of premise, tweak the definition of a shared space being allowed, or allow the ratios from another restaurant to be allowed. So we have a few things to think about on that particular, and I'll let him speak at the end to kind of give you guys an understanding of the concept.
And in that case, there would still be a food requirement.
So in their second building, they do have a sublease in their part, and then they have the part with another restaurant that would be serving food there that doesn't have alcohol sales. So talking about if you would be open to combining their sales within that building to qualify for the ratios.
So you'd have one place where you order and get your food, and then if you wanted to get a beer or whatever, then you'd go right next.
So there'll be brewing and manufacturing in this one building,
Right.
and you can buy packaged to go there, you can drink on site there, because that's what's allowed in a brewery.
Right.
But they would also be able to drink the same brews that they manufacture right next door in that other building or the courtyard, which
So the
currently isn't
restaurant
allowed,
and the
Are combined.
bar are combined. Yes.
where the food is at. So just by the definition of our premise, it's not allowed. If they had it all going on in the one building, it'd be allowed anyways without the food because they're a manufacturer. So we could talk about making contiguous exceptions for certain types, if you'd like to look at that. Yeah, that's why I'm trying to get to the crux of what council's really in favor of, so I can rewrite it. This one,
Simple part
so.
right now means no bars. And if
I
that's what
think that's
what we're after, then that's real simple.
pretty
Yeah.
sure that's what we're
Yeah.
after.
Yeah.
This,
So
I
keep
feel
that
like
in
this is
mind.
a stretch.
So just
That's the
getting,
underlying theme is no bars.
So absolutely, so I will go back and we will look at, so this is there, so we will look at editing or removing in that next one that comes before you. Along the same lines, this is, we may not even need to have this conversation, is this courtyard market. This to me sounds more like maybe an Avalon business, but it's talking about licensing the property manager. And staff has just said that we're not really sure that this was the intent. So our proposal would be that the establishments within this kind of zoning development would have to individually be licensed, or they could have events as going to be approved under our special events or catered events listing, and then conform to those if they were to have anything within their shared spaces. So you'll see when we bring before you the special events changes, a new definition for privately owned public spaces, which I believe this courtyard would be, and our green would be. They'll be treated a little differently than our standard special events on other properties. So we've been talking about making those to be able to have a few more and have a different, restrictions. And I believe this would fall under that in that case, and we can kind of get rid of this licensing the manager of the property to have freestanding vendors and things like that, that I just don't know was contemplated when it came forth. Is everyone okay with maybe tailoring it that way?
So as an example, just to kind of picture this, back when Sarah presented this back in December of 2020, I think, or 19, she used the example of Courtyard Market as Shops at Buckhead. Been to Shops at Buckhead. It's nice looking establishment, but it looks like it's kind of the same general feel where they have the shops that kind of surround the parking lot and maybe some things within the parking lot, establishments within the parking lot, and the whole thing, Courtyard Market.
It's like Avalon.
Yes.
But so what would we be endorsing here?
So under this,
Consumption, walking around?
yeah, under this current allowance, you are licensing the property manager as opposed to the individual establishments, and they could have freestanding vendors, trying to remember exactly, and basically their license to sell the alcohol. So we were just thinking maybe the establishments within the Courtyard Market, within the Avalon type facility, would each individually need to meet our requirements to have a alcohol license. And then the only exceptions to that would be events that were held on the property that would have that internal kind of little, you've seen the turfed green at Avalon and things like that. They could have events there, but it wouldn't be just freestanding vendors allowed to sell out there.
I would really like for that to come under the scrutiny of council on a
Case by case.
case-by-case basis. I don't see that as something that I personally would want to commit to code. But that's just my,
Or is that something that can be done by warrant?
Well, a Courtyard Market from the perspective of looking, the development side could be, but alcohol isn't a warrantable thing specifically other than the type of, so a Courtyard Market could be by warrant in certain zoning districts, yes. Then we could tailor the use of alcohol within those by that.
but why wouldn't we want individual retailers or companies to have to achieve their own permits? Why would we want to give it to a property manager? I mean, all my property manager friends are derelicts. They're not. But I'm just asking, why would one do that?
So that's kind of staff. So I think these came forth out of the understanding that these are starting to pop up and to be kind of on the edge of recruiting businesses. And our staff is just recommending maybe kind of scaling that back a little bit and saying, go back to our traditional, and then we could always revisit it. If we
Yeah,
get an
I'm not a
establishment that
no,
comes in
I'm
that's
just-
way out of,
Yeah.
so say we just get rid of these right now because they're kind of outside of what we're anticipating.
Thank you.
And we get an establishment that's coming in, we can bring it back before you
Yeah.
in a tailored format at that time, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not a no, I'm just, I don't know. I just,
Well, when you read the definitions, that's kind of how our finance staff feels. They're like, what is this and how is this allowed? So it's
Right.
like they don't know. So maybe the best choice would be through a warrant and then specifying what type of alcohol sales would be allowed there and then creating that chapter 4 match up to that.
yeah, it needs to have a lot of visibility attached to it.
Yeah.
In particular.
And that
think-
way, yeah, council can look at individually.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, because it would keep us from, I guess, unintended consequences where all of a sudden somebody comes up with a concept, and if we've got it in there, the code, and they meet the code, all of a sudden, we may have something that, no, this isn't something we're looking at, But there may be, someone may come forward with a concept that we say, you know what, that works with the mix that you have. So I guess I'm kind of the same line, as long as council can actually see what is being proposed for the whole entity, then
And I know these definitions went before Planning Commission, and they are in Chapter 64 also, so I'll make sure that they don't already require a warrant when I come back with the alcohol side. We'll vet that specifically. I don't remember seeing it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I'll check on that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So moving on back to those alcohol beverage caterers. Currently, we have this licensing requirements that require these caterers to also get special event permits. I just want to clean up and clarify this, that any time you are serving alcohol outside of your own facility, you would be needing a licensed caterer. And then those Milton caterers would pay, they'd come before the council and get a license for the year at $150. And then they would go back and have to get a permit approved by a city manager for each event. So then we would have some control and understanding over what events were taking place under that license, but they wouldn't have to pay us each time they're having an event. The $150 covers them for the year, cater the events that you're approved to cater. We're good with that. Same thing if they came to a special event. If you are running a special event and you hire our caterer, they'd be covered under their $150. They don't have to pay another $250 as it currently states. So we're just trying to clean that up and make that clear instead of having a fee, an additional fee, an additional fee. If you are a caterer from another jurisdiction, you have to come in, show us your catering permit, your alcohol license for what types of alcohols you're allowed to sell, and all your pours are permitted for that event, and you pay $50 at each event you come to. So that would be across now all events, special events, city events, public events, private events, all those things. It just would clean up some administrative side for that. And if you're with that, that's what we would aim to do. So I just spelled it out here again clearly that you can be a catered event or a special event, and you'd have the same structure. The only exception would be a special event could have a nonprofit.
Can you go back one page, please?
Absolutely.
Just want to make sure. So in the first one where it says 0 per event for the resident caterers.
For the catered event permit.
Right. So in that instance, the caterer, it's already somebody else's event. So if it's a special event, the other party, not the caterer, has probably already applied for the special use permit or the special event.
They
permit.
also pay community development for the special event permit from the zoning, police, fire, public works perspective. And then we were also charging them over here to serve alcohol at that special event. I'm just looking to clean that up.
So the reason I'm asking for clarification is it's already an event that's probably come before the city for consideration of what the event is. And we've already said yes to the event. So now we're just confirming that the caterer has the right clarification.
On a special event, on a catered event, it would be incumbent upon finance staff and the city manager to vet that event, because it wouldn't be going through because you wouldn't be impacting the public resources enough to need all the other departments to look at it.
Okay.
So they'd forego that fee. So there'd be no zoning event or recreation event fee.
I got it. Yeah, that's the clarification I was looking for. Thank you.
And then the one exception under special events is if you have a nonprofit running it, we currently allow this, we would continue to allow them for $100. We could change that to match the 50 for the other ones. If you like, it's currently $100 for a nonprofit to come in, and they get fingerprinted themselves, and they are the responsible pourer, and they can have anybody pour for them that's not permitted under that license. So currently, nonprofits can have their own staff that aren't all individually permitted for that one event pour. So if you would like to reconsider that, we can talk about it, but that's what's currently been allowed for, I think, as long as I've been here. Okay. Bring your own beverage. We're back to this one, just talking about cleaning that up a little bit. I believe we covered it all in the definition. When we were just trying, one of the things it does mention is throughout the ordinance, it starts mentioning what's not allowed to have a BYOB. Instead of having a list, I just want to say what is allowed, so we don't miss a license type and have confusion where someone thinks they can have one. So it starts, currently it's not listed under hybrid, but it's not allowed under hybrid by the sheer definition of it. So I don't know why someone might go, well, it's not listed that you can't have it, but it's not listed here. So I'm just trying to clean up that we don't have an exclusionary list, we have an allowed list. And then the hours, currently Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. until 1 hour before closing. We were looking to cap those at a certain time. So your eating establishment can't then extend their drinking on premise by closing at 3 or 4 instead of 2 a.m. under their alcohol license and still continue drinking at the establishment. So we're just looking to have, instead of, it'll be 1 hour before closing, no later than, say, 10 or 1 a.m. or closing no later than 9. So then you'd have to stop drinking at 9 so they're ready to drive by 10. And then at your eating establishments no later than 1, so they're ready to drive by 2 when all the other drinking stops and typically the restaurant closes.
And most restaurants in our,
To 2 a.m. if they wanted to. So we're just kind of clean this up so anyone who'd want to is still beholden to those same rules and not just by what's standard. Right.
okay, I would just encourage us to think about what is customary today, which appears to be,
we have seen, I'll have to look it back if we have any that are currently staying open until 2, but we've seen these hours at many of the cities as the hours for eating establishments. Those are kind of like the standard restaurant hours, it seems. But I'd be happy to look into that further and tailor them if the council would like that.
that'd be great.
In a moment, we can back into that right now, actually, for a moment. One of the recommendations from staff is going to be on the limited ones. So if you're not a 50-50, a hotel, a golf course, a private club, that you would have tailored hours. So maybe your 70-30s, or if we change it to 60-40, would be midnight or 11 or something else different than the 2 a.m. And then your further restricted ones would be that 10 a.m. that we have standard across almost every other license now, 9 to 10, something like that. So if council's in favor of that, we would look to tailor those more clearly, and that your 2 a.m. thing would only be for 50-50 type places or your standard. So here we have the ancillary taste, and this is the one that's become.
We lost your presentation again. Thank you.
Can you see it?
Nope. You're on the agenda.
Wonderful. Okay, so under, it was there for a second, I saw it. Okay. Under the ancillary tasting license, we have spoken about and heard some feedback about some concerns over specifically the liquor. So we're looking to make 2 different types of ancillary licenses. One would be for your package stores, and they would have no liquor allowed. So we'd go back to beer and or wine, or you could just do wine. That's the original iteration that we had back in 2014 was wine only. So we could discuss if you want wine and beer or just wine, and to make them more like events. So you wouldn't just go in and request a tasting, which is kind of how it's outlined currently. And it sounds like that in our ordinance. I think the intent was always that it would be an event, that like you can come in and taste samples of what's going on inside the establishment of new things they may have gotten from distributors. So we would propose to have it maybe once a week for 4 hours, and you can taste those things under those 2 ounces, 4 samples, 8 ounce total, and be done for the day. And no liquor was in the off-premise package stores. Then we'd look to, and I think I have them spelled out more clearly. There we go. So here's your package store, Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. No Sunday tastings allowed. We're kind of tailoring that to the consumption style stuff. So if you're not a 50-50 store, you can't drink on Sundays. So we just tailored that right after that instead of according to the hours of the package store. And we can change that if you'd like, as long as state law allows. Again, making them more like events, no daily samples, 1 event per week, and only 1 type of alcohol given at each event. So you wouldn't be mixing, again, the beer and the wine if you allowed beer and wine. So you wouldn't have to be following those ratios and then changing that within a calendar day to ensure that they wouldn't have multiple events within a day, kind of just bulletproofing that a little bit. Again, only at a counter that consisted no more than 10% of the floor area to limit your physical bars, taking up the space, and tastings only permitted within the enclosed portion of the premises, so we're not leaving to have outdoor patio tastings and things like that. So it's strictly to taste what is for sale for what you want to buy to leave with, as opposed to a sitting place to have a drink. Everyone behind that?
I would, oh, sorry, go ahead,
ahead.
Rick. Well, I was just going to suggest, I mean, you know, I don't really see people going into a liquor store to taste beer. You know, I would just suggest we limit it to wine if we're going to do this. You know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's coming into Crabapple, but it's
We
just
do
a
have the current-
suggestion.
This would be impacting a current business, just to remind
Okay.
everybody. And
Okay.
so where we're at, we have the current Milton package store that has all 3. And
sell beer
so it would be
too, right?
telling them something different that they could do than what they
Okay.
believe they're allowed to do today. So this would be an impacting a current business. The other 2 tastings we have are both wine only currently.
Wine only?
Wine
And
only.
so we, I just want to understand this process. So we approve that, and that alcohol license that we approved for the package store will run through the end of this year?
That's how I've understood it from
Okay.
Ken's explanation, and then on the new renewal, it would be changed to the new.
Okay, so we do have the opportunity to change it.
Absolutely.
Under the new permit that is issued.
And you are correct. It would expire December 31st.
Okay, I just like
And we
to
have
think
one
about that.
pending that also has sales of different types that has asked for an ancillary license. Pending later this evening's craft beer and wine discussion, they would also have beer and wine, so we would talk about that.
Are tastings in liquor stores
I-
a regular thing?
Well, that's what I think I asked last time.
Well, we
Yeah.
only have this one, so I won't say in Milton it's a regular thing, but
We just got it approved.
Right.
Just
Mhm.
on the 8th. I guess I don't know why we would need that for retail. Most people go in and know what they want.
Yeah.
I mean, Total Wine, I mean, without naming all other establishments, I know there's a lot of different stores that sell a wide variety of stuff, and I've never seen a tasting for that type of thing, at least around here. I may be mistaken. Brew pubs, I understand that may be an option. Wineries.
And so
definitely-
that's why we separated them. So this is specific now to the package store, and in a moment, I'll get into our recommendations for those types of places that are manufacturing their own.
Right.
I'd like
The
to,
only thing I would say is just, and again, this is all new to all of, I mean, we're all trying to, you got a new city, new downtown, new, all this is, if we're trying to, possibly have upscale, something different, I could see an upscale facility that might have, you want to try the, as long as you can manage it to where it doesn't turn into a bar and it's limited, but if they're selling a new product or if they have a
That's what I think.
manufacturer that comes in and wants to allow people to taste, here's a new craft beer, here's some new wine, or here's new alcohol. I think the key to that, I mean, that to me could give it a nice flavor as long as it can be controlled where people don't go in there to really have their drinks. They're going in there to taste something new that they may decide to buy and then take home with them.
I think that was the intent. So by tailoring it back to those maybe certain times of the day or certain days of the week, we can kind of maybe get back there being an event as opposed to I walk in and want to taste everything while I'm buying on any Tuesday morning or something.
Right.
So in this example, basically you're scaling it back from what we have today, where from 9 a.m. until 10 p.m., they could be doing tasting every day of the week and do it.
So I need to go back and confirm with state law. That's the way ours reads, but I
That's
have
what
to
I
make
mean.
sure from state law that that's actually what it intends anyways. So I will come back to you because sometimes it is not as clearly understood, it's not right there. Some of the explanations I've read make it sound like it can only be events. You would have only those tastings for the staff from the distributors, not for the public. So I've got to go and clarify that, and maybe we allow those distributors to come in and do the tastings for the staff to know if they want to even carry it. And that could be separate than when you walk in. So our idea is to go back to events for the public.
Yeah, I guess I would have.
You could have that event at any of those times. Like, I don't know who having it. We could tailor that time to not be 9 a.m., but if that's
Well,
when,
I like
just once
this
a
wording
week.
better than what we currently have, because then it makes it more of an event tasting versus anytime you come in, we're going to have samplings and you try samplings. That I think fits more into kind of what Joe was saying, if they want to do something that's unique or they want to highlight products. And I do understand someone comes in and gives you samples who's trying to sell new product. That's different than giving it to the general public.
yeah, I think this is going in the right direction. I think if you added a couple more layers to it, where if you said, like, and by event, it's not every day, like we're just talking about. And if it's by event parameters, where it's one day a week, not to exceed 4 hours, but the 4 hours have to be within a certain period of time, not before noon.
Yeah.
Must complete by 8 o'clock or something. I think you're going in the right direction, so it doesn't become a destination for tasting.
So can I clarify, if we were to get all those layers, are we just talking wine only, beer, wine, and liquor?
I'm okay with the beer because, like you said, the beer has changed from 2014 to 2021. Back 10, 20 years ago, it was just Miller Lite, Bud Light. Now we got this craft beer stuff, which they're just like connoisseurs of kind of wine. So as long as we limit it and limit the hours and everything, like what Paul and Rick were saying, then I think I'm okay with it.
And I
You're saying
think
beer
maybe
and
you
wine,
come up with
not
some
alcohol.
Not
language,
liquor. Yeah.
some language for council to discuss, or, to chew on and discuss more, but to where it's not, where it's just an open tasting. You walk in the store and anything you want to taste, but it's more, it's a setup. And look, today
It's like a trunk show.
we're representing so-and-so, and we have these 4 different things that, we'll allow a small taste of.
And again, it will be only your permitted pourers that are doing this. We were not talking about allowing distributors in to start,
Right.
selling their ideas to the consumer. Your manufacturing places, we were talking about clarifying language a little more to allow them. Clearly, we're asking them to make a product in our city. So people would want to try that product more often than just once a week, potentially. They'd be going into this place. So we were looking to open that up as long as it's within state law allowances, allowing you to taste at the brewery, winery, brew pubs more often than once a week. Still, you'd have those quantity limitations, and we could even crunch those times a little better to not be all hours of the day like that. So we can kind of match up the times, but allow them to do it more than once a week. Council on board with that at a manufacturing place or a hybrid?
So does this
And they would have
This
liquor.
definition of ancillary tasting license does away with any establishment coming in and saying, hey, I'd like to serve, while you're getting your nails done, I'd like to be
That's a different one. That's still there. That's an incidental.
incidental.
let's step
So
away
that's
for a
not
second.
ancillary.
An incidental is when you have so many, an establishment that does other things, that's not liquor selling establishment, it doesn't typically have food, that they offer you, they can't sell, they can only offer you up to 2 glasses, I believe it is, of wine or beer. And then those sales of how much they're spending on alcohol has to be limited to 2% of their overall sales. And so there's restrictions from the quantities, the times, and the amounts that they can use in their actual money to serve. So they're thinking like, you go into these nice nail salons, they offer, or I guess they offer you a glass of wine. I don't
Haven't
go to
been
any
in
nail
one
salon of that
recently, so-
caliber. Boom.
Get your wine.
But we also have it at the interior design store up in Birmingham Crossroads, where you can go in and look at the different interior design things and have a glass of wine while you're there to do that. So that is incidental. If we want to talk about further looking at that, we can, but I didn't bring that up since it was restricted so specifically.
So Bernadette, I have a question. So a farm winery has to also hold an ancillary tasting license?
It's
or-
included.
It's included.
There's one section of the ordinance that says it's included and one section that says you need to get it. We are going with the fact that we know what a farm winery would be doing, and we're going to clean up the language to go that it would be included upon the payment of your farm winery license, that you would have tastings, but they were going to be tailored accordingly.
Okay, so it is inconsistent because I found that too. At one point, it says you have to have a license, and then
And then
also
one, it
it
says
says
you
it's a
get it.
hybrid that
So
you get it. So
I'm going to clean that up.
Okay. But when we talk about the hours for tastings, whether you get it or you have to apply for it, I want to suggest that you look at other wineries in the area and the very limited hours of operation of those wineries.
So in the farm winery section, we're going to talk about potentially giving hours for the types of activities at the winery. So
Okay,
we will talk about that in
perfect.
just a
All right,
moment.
so I'm ahead of-
We've really tried to vet every single thing that's kind of come our way. It's hard when you're looking at it piece by piece, but yes, absolutely. 1 minute, we're going to talk about that. And then also, if that were to be a conditional use permit, all the hours would be tailored by the location through the conditional use permit. So you wouldn't spell it out necessarily. You can do it further in the use permit. So,
Okay, which is coming.
yeah, community development is working on that as part of your moratorium. That's a little separate since I can't do that piece of it with chapter 4. But we're looking to tailor chapter 4 for any that are not within that use permit.
Just food for thought, based on recent experience, that I don't know that a tasting permit should be something you get. I think it should be something you have to apply for.
Okay, I can consider taking all that language out.
I think it should be considered just like everything else. It's something that's awarded, and it also could be taken away.
What was that? Can you say that again?
So in a tasting, she's saying it's if you're applying for your permit to be a farm winery,
Right.
that you get a tasting room.
Okay.
I think that it should be something that you apply for.
Okay. You're not talking about the brew pubs or you're talking about, okay.
Would we be comfortable with the limit to say that it would be included in the fees of, or you want the separate, like just you're saying, check the box that says you want this thing, it's separate living, it's a separate piece and can be
Can be
Like you said,
granted or
okay.
it can be taken
I
away.
can definitely clean that up and I can
Same
just,
thing,
I can
I
remove
would
the
also,
included.
though, say the same thing for the distilleries and the.
Yeah, I would
breweries.
make that across the board if we do
Well, hold
that.
it. How is that use different from a microbrewery or a micropub?
I'm saying it's not. I would like it to be.
He's saying remove it from all,
Consistent across
just
all.
strike the included with.
So
Then we're taking away one of the attractions of being
No,
those
you just
establishments.
have
in the
to be
first
a
place.
good citizen. You have to be a good purveyor of your skill.
so
If
if I
you,
open
if you have, or if you're somebody that's not abiding by the rules, if you're a problematic situation, then you can take away the tasting part of it. And then you're a manufacturer only.
Yeah, I don't think I understand that.
Well, Bernadette seems to. Can we? let
well,
her
no,
vet
I'm
it?
just curious. So if I do a brewery,
We're
and I-
complicating things again. We're trying to control that which is hard to control.
Right. I'm suggesting that if you don't have a cooperative,
A year ago, we didn't have a problem with tastings at farm wineries.
right, we didn't have anybody who was,
So you're saying that based on our
Non-compliant.
experience, we should change it?
yep,
I think we need to make sure that we provide guidance on what we want the ordinances to provide and not what examples of individuals that have used those ordinances in the wrong way.
when you've experienced a non-compliant or non-compliant business, it gives me reason to put some red flags on what kind of controls we have.
But you're penalizing future citizens.
Not if they're compliant. If you're a
Well-
good citizen to your task, your skill, your
what's
craft,
considered a good citizen?
you abide by where consumption takes place, you abide by how much consumption is taking place, you abide by the hours and the rules that we put into play.
I
That
think
the
there's other
tasting
ways
is,
for us to address those problems. I think we should assume good behavior, not bad behavior.
well, if you've got bad behavior, you have no hammer.
But I would say we
We always have to
wanna-
hammer.
We do always want to assume good behavior. We need to have, some kind of actions we can take if they do have bad behavior.
But
Right. That's what I'm suggesting,
But-
is that there
don't
is a
think
way
that's-
to do that.
but is that really what's on the table? I think it's,
It's administratively
Yeah,
to
it's what
either
is-
make them check the box and pay the fee, or to assume that it would be considered a part of their license fees and allowable things that they can do under their other
By
license,
right, once
so.
they have the license.
Mhm.
All right, if I'm in the minority, okay.
I'm just processing it. I'm just processing it.
Not reading.
I don't know if we've had, or if we're going to run into so much an issue with the tasting portion. I think some of the challenges come if you have tasting and you have consumption, that those are two different issues. If you're selling in glasses of wine or glasses of whatever, for the winery, I think that's really where we differentiate. The tasting, I don't know if I've got so much, we've kind of been bulking it all together. Consumption, which is separate license, and tasting, which is part of the winery.
Mhm.
I don't see, if we keep to the limits of what you can do for tasting,
Mhm.
I don't see that as big an issue. My concern is if you give a consumption license, making sure that it still is consumed within X number of parameters, with the being in the tasting room is where the consumption is allowed, or within the adjacent property. I think that's where I would have a little bit more of a concern of how do you regulate it?
So we can go back to having the manufacturer license need to have the separate consumption package. We can tier them out, so they would be applying for what they'd be doing at that individual property.
Yeah.
And then that would be, the consumption side would be separate from the assumption that just because you are brewing that you can consume, right? So we can do that.
But, and again, tasting and consuming, I'm differentiating.
Yes,
Consumption, I
they-
mean, where
they
you're
are
buying, you're
differentiated.
paying for a glass of whatever the beverage is. A lot of wineries don't even sell. All they do is they do tasting, then you can buy their wine. If you like the tasting, let me try this, let me try that. It changes a little bit when you're actually selling and allowing people to consume, making sure that they consume within the parameters that we want for the license.
There's some language today that talks about being able to charge or not charge for tastings. We can go with those would have to be the free ones, and that would limit that. Tastings have to be free. Then there wouldn't be the abuse, then also quantity limits. You have all these limits that
I think, I mean, personally, if I think of using the winery example, I don't have an issue with tastings because a tasting is not, and you can limit what that is, what's a flight or whatever. So it's not pouring full glasses of wine. So the tasting, I guess I'm not for saying, well, let's make that a chargeable event. I think that kind of could hurt your retail and the whole idea of the winery. But I think when we get into a consumption license where you're selling wine for consumption, that's, I think, a different thing. That's where I would personally, I'd like to still see a separate license so that's regulated different than your individual tastings. That's just me.
Yeah, I have no issue with the tasting.
I think that's an important benefit of being a manufacturer is to convince, and you're manufacturing a product that is a little bit unique and that people don't know they want to risk buying it unless they've been able to sample it. And so I think we're denying them an essential part of their business if we don't allow for tastings.
I will take all that feedback and I will come back with some recommendations that hopefully address both concerns in the whole of that license application. So I'll look at ways to address that.
Bernadette, just as a comment, most tasting at wineries are scheduled.
Okay, I will look at that as well.
If you look at different winery
So instead of saying
websites,
one per week, we would say
they're
whatever,
typically
yeah.
they're scheduled, planned. Most
Here in Georgia?
Well, like in the evening or something like that. It's not a casual
for
day-long thing.
So if you go to Napa Valley,
you can go anytime.
you just drive up the road
Right,
and
and then
stop
you
into
keep
any
going
winery you want that has an open tasting room.
Yeah. I think they even Traverse City,
We'll look to see
Michigan, they
what's
have the
most
same
common
thing
and we
too.
can,
What I find interesting about farm or wineries from California compared to here is they shut down at 5 o'clock.
Right.
Well, that's my point. So we have and I know we're going to get to this. So our times for, tasting rooms, specifically a farm winery, is wide open. It's very unusual. So that's what I'm trying to get at
Okay.
is, tightening up, especially on Sunday. We have a farm, it's till 10 o'clock. Mostly they close at 5 or 6 o'clock the latest. So maybe, I know we'll get to that. I have some
Well,
examples for you.
yeah,
I'm on,
kinda-
it's the next slide.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, my experience in Napa is you go there purposefully. If you're going to taste and perhaps purchase,
Right.
but not be entertained
Right.
per se. And so I think in Georgia, has happened is sort of a
That's what the wine train's for, is the entertainment part of that.
is sort
The
of
wine's
this.
not as good. They have to do something.
but-
Hey, I'm not saying it.
Nope.
I'm just, the whole entertainment, turn it into an event is where we have a problem. So
See-
whatever you can do to work through that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And to me, that sounds like that when you're there for a long period of time, that's not really a tasting, that's an event. If you're sitting there for hours, you don't do that when you go to other wineries I've been to, even in different regions. You go there, you taste the wine, you don't like it, you move on, but you're not staying there for hours, like you'd said, to be entertained. There may be a venue that allows you to consume wine and listen to music and hang out or whatever, but to me, that's more of an event than a winery providing a tasting and sales, that type of thing. That's just been my experience.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So now we'll move into the wineries a little more specifically to make sure, these are the slides I had prepared. So we'll telling you again what's currently allowed: the production and manufacturing, the wholesale and distribution, the off-premise retail package sales, and the on-premise consumption, including both tastings and the consumption for sale, right? And then every farm winery, like any other property, is allowed to still have those two special events per year. It states that specifically in the law, so I'm just reiterating what's allowed in the law currently.
Okay.
So we talked about the adjacency. Just wanted to recapture all the things I've heard recently talked about and just saying that in the definitions we're talking about, we're addressing the adjacency concerns about where can you consume alcohol on the property of a farm winery. So the adjacency to the tasting room, the approved tasting room would, I hope, clarify some of those concerns that council's had in the past regarding where on the property. And then talking about tastings being governed by 493, then we can talk about them included or not, depending upon what we come back with. And certain times, we can restrict those times for tastings, and we could do by appointment only. We can talk about a few different things like that. Is there guidance specifically? Do we want appointments, or do we want a time window for tastings?
So when I look at, Forsyth's First Winery, they are open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 4 to 8:30, 12 to 8 on Saturday, Sunday, 12 to 6. So it's more limited. And because people are going there to taste wine, or they're usually serving some sort of food. There's a gourmet kitchen in one of the wineries. So and I'd be happy to hand this off to you, Bernadette, just looking at some of the other, wineries that are successful have hours. And I think on Sunday, our winery hour is till 10 o'clock, which.
That's correct.
I definitely feel like that needs to be changed. And we, I don't want to get into someone's business and tell them, but the hours are not until 10 o'clock. I think that drives or satisfies the need to be entertained.
Can I ask a clarification? Are we comfortable with the off-premise sales having separate hours to have the sale and then having the consumption have restricted, or you want all of the hours for everything going on cut back?
So if you drive into the winery to get a bottle of wine, I would definitely say, because it is in an AG1 area, that we do need to limit the time in which you can drive to the wine to get wine, which is totally off-premise sales. That's my opinion. And I also would like to see that retail package distribution have a distance from a residential home.
From neighboring and the property on which it's being sold?
Yep.
Or just neighboring?
No, not on the property that it's being sold, but from if there are adjacent neighbors that are subject to the retail sale of wine, there should be a distance so that, and I would like to see a distance and a time limitation. This is in AG1.
So I'm looking into that. I try in the adjacency definition, I try to address that by the location and design would have to be approved by council in a publicly held meeting. We're talking with legal on whether or not Chapter 4 can control something like that. So I will find that out. If it can't, we'll look at those specific distances. But because every property would be unique, we thought maybe it'd be broader to say that council had to approve the location and how big. So the design meaning how many square feet.
This may actually be a better idea. What is
Okay.
coming before us right now? Can we look at both options and talk to legal?
Yep, because headlights and it could become very popular to just go to your next door neighbors and it is what it is. So we need to take a closer look at that.
So I will, like I said, this is what's currently allowed, and in the direction I've just been given, we'll go back and vet all of this before we come back before you. I'm working with legal to fully understand the multiple license section. And we were going to remove any language regarding the weddings and dining facilities, since that's not really what was anticipated for our farm wineries. Those are the larger establishments we're seeing out in North Georgia. And then lastly, talked about adding a requirement to show that state license when they apply, the current one in November, as well as that they were approved in January. So we're not going a whole year before finding out that the state didn't approve them. So.
And compliance with
that would be through that, by being issued that license, they would have had to go through all those state processes. That is what from the Department of Revenue tells us that they did comply.
And just as a side, I don't see the need to have the multiple locations. It's confusing that this winery can have this location. I just don't see that
Just
as
having
being
individually
in any way-
licensed wineries.
Yeah, we need, in my opinion, need to strike that.
So I will be clarifying all of that in the research we're doing with legal. We're almost to the end. I know this one was towards the end. So our limited tap license currently, it really just states that you'd be an establishment that has 5 or fewer beer taps for craft beer or wines, and you can only serve 48 ounces within a calendar day to any participant. It doesn't really say anything else. We wanted to know if this council wanted some clarifying language as to the percentage of sales and floor space, kind of how we have with the craft beer wine market and some of the other licenses, just making sure currently this would be allowed in any kind of establishment. So if you want it tailored, to let us know.
So Bernadette, this is almost because like the bike shop has it,
The
right?
only one we have that has
Yeah.
it. So any changes we make would be impacting potentially the bike shop, and we would have to keep that in mind.
Because I think this is kind of a loophole in case someone wanted to abuse the system in the future. Would that be appropriate to say?
I think that was staff's concern, was that it had no other regulations. So
Right.
we can't, as a staff, go, oh, no, they meant this. We would like to know, what do you mean? So we can write it in.
Yeah.
And now the bike shop, it's restricted to this little area. I know there are some building code specifications that have to be adhered to, and that's kind of that fire marshal and building official piece, but to just spell it out more clearly so that's not up to them saying something and then coming back and saying they're being overly restrictive.
So could anyone open up
A limited tap, yeah.
a limited tap room and?
That's how it reads
Okay.
to us.
Then yeah, we
currently.
probably need to do.
Yeah.
something
We
like
So
need
if you
to
sold
write that down.
t-shirts or dog
Okay.
food is kind of what I likened it to, that you could have 5 beer taps.
Yeah.
I could sell popcorn and just beer all day. Yeah.
So I think
So-
that that's something we did definitely want to.
Okay,
Nail
so what I'm
down.
going to look to do is go back and create the limited licenses that are more specific to having other types of sales be the predominant establishment, and then you could have this. Okay, so I will work on that. The Crowler Growler license is for, if everyone's not familiar, a crowler and a growler is a glass, ceramic, or metal container that's 64 ounces or less, that's filled by the establishment for off-premise consumption. So it's basically just the container in which you're carrying your beer home to drink, or wine. So we are looking, currently the law restricts those from being sold anywhere that sells liquor. Well, the distillery has the brewery and the distillery together in their concept because of the information about T5. And as long as it's prohibited by state law, we were just getting some feedback as to whether or not we had a concern about this. They're leaving the establishment with this container. Do we care that they're also having to sell liquor in that establishment?
The idea is not to be able to take home the liquor in a volume like that.
Right, we can make that to say specifically beer. Oh, it says licensed with a craft beer from a keg. So it has to be a beer from a keg.
And typically a growler, it wouldn't be something they would consume on prep.
You can't. It
Right,
has to be
I can't-
sealed.
I can't
and you
think of
take
a
it
growler
home.
experience I've ever had where you could consume.
No, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
So if
you don't
they have
usually
the liquor, I don't
consume.
see
And that's
it.
kind of why we got to, we don't know how this,
You want to?
unless it's a state law that we couldn't find the word crowler or growler in the state law. So we're trying to vet it really through legal to make sure we're not missing something. But if this is not a state law, is council comfortable with us removing that? Now, they're a liquor selling establishment, so they'd have a warrant. So we can kind of tailor other things, but just kind of removing this piece of it from the law. And then restaurant package license, we're talking about during COVID, they started letting eating establishments sell bottles or wine of wine or packages of beer with your to-go order. It's currently restricted to 1 bottle of wine or 1 package of beer. Our other establishments don't have those restrictions. So I was just looking to see that if this wasn't state law, if council would be comfortable with kind of allowing them to do, they're leaving with it. So are we comfortable with not having those limited restrictions so they could be equivalent to other establishments that we have?
State law was amended, I believe, this past year to allow this.
I talked with one of the attorneys at Mr. Gerard's office today, and they were just trying to clarify to make sure, because they couldn't find that specific language. They were seeing the next one we're about to talk about, which is the delivery people. So this is when you go there. There's so many specific specifications. This is when you go there to pick it up. Can you leave with more than 1 bottle or package? So if you're comfortable and state law allows it, they can have 2 bottles of wine with their to-go order. This kind of gets, I would think that you're going to pay more to go to a restaurant to buy a bottle of wine than you would another store. So it's going to, I would believe, even itself out. It was just to make sure that they have the same rights as a craft beer and wine market right next door, to not be restricted differently than they are.
So is the idea here that they don't become a retail package outlet?
I mean,
If I'm
you'd
just
have
selling-
you'd
I'm
have a
selling
food
the-
order with it. They'd still need to be 50-50. This couldn't come in and can take over their sales ratios by sheer fact that they have to be an eating establishment to have all the other things they want to do.
Okay.
So kind of is self-regulating.
You can't, this could be to go, if I come up, pick up to-go food and then hey, I want
2
you know,
bottles.
wine, beer, and take that with me. Okay.
Or-
But you're buying food at the same time.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
And then I believe this is the final slide. This is that home delivery of alcohol that was recently passed. So they have this thing called a packaged goods retailer. So that's someone that works at the establishment delivering your food and alcohol. The way I understood the law is that if we don't have an ordinance restricting it or allowing it, it is allowed. So I want to just make sure and get your temperature on where we are with someone from our restaurant driving the order to the person's place and allowing alcohol to be in that order, and just making sure I write a law that tailors it to what we'd like to see, so it's not just state law default.
They would still have to check ID and do the standard things.
It had a lot of, you had to pay in advance, you couldn't like pay at the door, so you'd have to pay the establishment. There had some specifications that were regulating it from the state perspective. The state's pretty good about writing those tailored things, so I will make sure that to bring forth, if we want this option, exactly what is required.
Yeah, that's tricky, because if you've got a third-party provider who's the transportation.
No, it specifically said it had to be an employee.
Of
So so for our circumstances, we could say a permitted pourer,
Yeah.
to be very clear.
Yep.
But I did check that with legal today. I was like, can Uber Eats do this? And they were
Right.
like, no. They said no. So, but we would clarify in our ordinance that we wouldn't allow that if we want to do this. And that's why, instead of just letting it default, I'd like to spell it out.
You've got the pourer with a license, and you've got the establishment with a license that put their license at risk for not being able to tell what somebody's age is.
And I think these kinds of options are just allowing for, if there were to be another quarantine or things like that, businesses to continue to thrive. So that's the kind of things they're looking at allowing, I believe, is why these are all coming up now. Is everyone kind of okay with that if I tailor it to our pourers and things like that? Any questions? Celebration?
Hey, Bernadette, I have one last thing, so I'm sorry. On the types of licenses, since you're doing public notification, I mean, it seems like having a temporary alcohol license, which is in there, would be in conflict with public notification. I don't know, I mean, if you can say where that's important that we do it, I guess, but public notification would be,
We have allowed it in the past. It's always been there. We currently started, I believe, charging for it, where it used to just be allowed.
We do this, the temporary licenses first, they don't bind us, I don't believe, into an actual license. In fact, I think I just had one come across my desk for a restaurant. And what they have to show, if I remember correctly, some type of hardship that it's going to cause if they don't get the temporary. If we did have them go through the process of advertising, it probably would negate the benefit of getting the temporary license.
yeah.
But I'm relatively sure that granting of the temporary does not ensure the granting of a permanent
Absolutely.
license. So we could grant the temporary, let them go through the process, and then if there's a problem, not grant the actual license. I could say probably in the last 6 years, maybe I've signed 3 or 4 of them.
And to clarify, typically we don't send them up to the city manager until they've passed the background check, passed zoning. So they're pretty much on their way, ready to come to you. Now, it would be without the advertising piece of it and the public input at this point now, and your final seal of approval. But we do the internal administrative vetting before they go upstairs for temporary approval.
Bernadette, one quick thing. What recourse does an applicant have if in the future, at some point, community development denies the opportunity to have a permit? Is there going to be any kind of built-in thing if they feel like they've been treated unfairly? Not that this ComDev would, but I'm talking 10 years down the road.
We have in the alcohol side a grievance process where they can come before a public hearing and they can come speak to you and all that kind of stuff. From a warrant or a zoning perspective, I'm not familiar, so I'll let Bob speak to that.
They would appeal to the BZA.
Okay.
Okay.
So there are
Very
some
good.
avenues for them to take consideration.
Okay, Paul.
I've got one more. Bernadette, I think it was on page 12 of your presentation, as I was flipping through it today. It talked about under farm winery. I want to clarify whether or not you intended to say it was just for Georgia wines,
So we currently allow Georgia wines and other wines from anywhere we
Right,
currently
and I
allow.
think if this is the right page, I don't recognize this at the moment.
I have edited it quite a bit over the weekend. Um, It was kind of getting, some sections were just givens and I kind of took them out, added some other things in.
I'm sorry, say it
Only
again.
40% has to be Georgia.
Yeah, but this doesn't say Georgia in particular, and what I was looking at in the presentation said Georgia. Maybe this isn't the page.
I think it was in the definition. That was
Oh,
me.
okay,
The
that's what it
definition.
is.
Oh, okay.
The first 2 hours ago.
Yeah. Thought I was
I'm
gonna
trying to
catch
get
it.
there. A quicker way of getting there.
Oh,
There it is.
yeah.
I've hit up too many times.
I saw it. It was,
I've hit up too many times and now it's just,
Oh, now it's catching up.
it's kind of on a little bit of a delay. I apologize. It's went all the way back to the beginning and now I probably hit down too many times. I'm going to escape out of it and we're just going to do it a different way. So
Okay.
bear with me for a moment.
What are we looking for?
The definition that had some concern about the farm winery, I believe, right?
Yep.
Everything is on this scroll delay.
There we go.
All right, so farm winery. This is the current definition of our farm wineries.
So it's after the red, it says is authorized to sell Georgia wine at its premises. I think that's what you're looking
Yep,
at.
I think that's what it was that I was wanting to clarify.
So we will clarify the definition to match what it says in the section to be consistent. So one thing we're going through is vetting every single, so I will clarify because we have approved in the past the other wines.
Okay.
I believe if you go to 4-85, it does start explaining, and the wines of other wineries. So
Okay.
I will clarify that.
All right.
So Bernadette, so you have a lot to do. What's the timing of this process?
I have a lot of it done already. Been working on some redlined copies. Working already with Jordan Davis on some of this. My goal is to get this before you in the October sessions for the main things you've had concerns about, right? So the things that we want to ensure are fixed for this next cycle. And then we would come before you for an overhaul of this license in the future. But the things we've talked about tonight, cleaning up and requiring ratios and times, I believe we can get before you in October. And then we would have that all approved on the 20th. And then we would send out the renewal applications for 22 based on those new approvals.
We're going to aim for the first meeting in October if we can pull that off.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. And Tammy, did we have a public comment on this?
Correct. Bernadette, he wanted to speak on this one, correct? Yes, I'd like to invite Mr. Clay Gridley to the podium, please.
Good evening. My name is Clay Gridley. My father and I were the owners of Six Bridges Brewing in Johns Creek, Georgia. We opened about 3 years ago. We were Johns Creek's first and only craft brewery. We were Georgia's first and only father-son brewery as well. So I was a firefighter for 9 years. My father, he was in fiber optics. He was retiring. I was looking for a career change. We did it as a hobby, and we started a brewery. A hobby gone wild, I would say. So I want to introduce myself because we were approached by Crabapple Market in, I think it was November of last year, to bring a brewery to Milton. And we've been working since then with, the former economic developer. Let's see, working with Crabapple Market, working over there, people with the state, and so on. And let's see, we did a lease with them. We've ordered equipment, everything, and we're trying to do a distillery as well. So there's been a shift in alcohol in general, where it's divided up into 3 segments, where it's beer, spirits, and wine. And it's really popular right now for breweries to also do spirits. And we've gotten our DSP license, which is the Federal Distiller's Permit. And we're at the local level with that too. But I just want to come introduce myself and answer any questions that you may have about our operations and what we intend to do, who we are, anything like that, because as you have heard, alcohol can get kind of complex. It's a highly regulated industry, and there's a lot to it. And just hearing some of this stuff that's going on today, it can get complex, and there are alcohol attorneys. In fact, we have the best in the state, and it's who most people use around here anyways. So just wanted to kind of introduce myself and see if you had any questions for me about what we have in mind.
Mr. Goodley, just for business sake, could you state your address just for the record? You've got
Oh,
your
sure.
name on there, but we need your
Yeah, I'm
address.
sorry.
That's
You want my home address?
That's fine.
Okay, yeah, I live in Cherokee County. It's 200 Cedar Valley Court, Canton, Georgia.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah.
And so with that, I guess technically, we'll end the public comment on that. I don't know from the legal side if council had a question, if that's appropriate now or not. Obviously, in public comment, we don't allow that, but, and I'm not sure if council had any questions. Okay.
I guess I have, one more little thing to add. Should I talk about the premise aspect, or is that for a different time?
This is the where one building attaches through the courtyard to the other building. All the manufacturing is in the one side according to the original zoning, and talk about what can they do in the other building. The concept was a shared space with another eating establishment that wouldn't be theirs, but if you want to explain how the lease would work, maybe that would help go towards the questions we had about different leases or connected leases.
So, we did a big business study, viability, see if it makes sense. So for us, we need about 3,500 square foot minimum. It's really popular now to be on green space, to have rooftop, all that. Those are big checks right there. So we looked around the crabapple development, and we didn't find one space that checked all of those. So it was proposed to us to combine two spaces, and it's building L&M, which is 1850 and 1860 Heritage Walk. And it checked a lot of boxes. It's divided up into two buildings. Does create some operational challenges there, but at the same time, we saw some advantages to it as well. So another thing, it's good to have a food component to something like this. Otherwise, it might look like a bar. And I will say that breweries are not bars. We are a manufacturer according to the federal government, according to the state government, and even at the local level. So it's kind of a quasi entity because we manufacture, we sell on site, we sell retail to go as well. So we picked the site over with buildings L&M, which is at the roundabout on the far end over there. It's the red brick buildings. And so it's the operational challenges is one building is 1,600 square foot, the other building is 2,100 square foot. And at the time with the Milton economic developer, manufacturing could only occur in one building. So we had to put everything in there and then a small tap room, and then have some redundancy stuff in the other building as well. And then have that subtenant as a food component to it. So it's kind of divide and conquer, but we saw some advantages to it. And with our operations, we need to have the what's spelled out in our lease. Our lease is both buildings, the patio and the rooftop area as well is our actual premise. And it's come up throughout our licensing process that the definition right now for Milton, premise reads the building itself, where in our lease, we're leasing both buildings, the patio, the rooftop. And that creates some challenges at the state level because it's not consistent with what the state allows. We would like our premise to be viewed as what is in our lease, which is both buildings, the patio, and the rooftop area right there. And that would allow us to have one state license. And like even in our lease in Johns Creek, the patio is considered part of the premise there as well. So it is spelled out in our lease that way. And
Essentially, Stacy had found some spaces nearby that do combine ratios. There's a potential to talk about premise being spelled out in the warrant. If it's a liquor selling establishment, we can go that route. There's a couple of things we can talk about as long as the council was in favor of that. And we just wanted some guidance tonight onto your feelings about this type of establishment falling kind of outside that specific definition of premise being a building, where we were going with this concept.
I would say in this case, I would be open to exploring options and maybe run it through legal and as well as staff, but I don't know what the rest of the council
And it's just beer. And first of all, welcome. Thank you for the information and for presenting. So we're just talking about beer, correct?
Of the other still, right?
Correct. We do intend to have a distillery there as well, and it's a small operation.
Beer distillery.
Well, the process is very similar. It actually starts the same, but then you distill it, which takes it a little bit further, higher alcohol, to actually consider it spirits, and then we have to dilute it back down so somebody can actually consume it. So,
I believe under our definition, it falls under distilled spirits.
Okay.
So if we were, so a liquor selling establishment would have a warrant, and if the council wanted to go down that route, we would talk about premise being defined by the building or the warrant at that point, if that would be a consideration.
I guess explore it, you know. Does it muddy the waters and we're talking about consumption area and immediately adjacent, and you're talking about 20 feet, if we're talking about a courtyard, does it get bigger?
So
Have we
with the 20
already broken
feet,
out some of our own rules?
with
but-
the 20 feet, we were talking with legal about maybe making that specific to 485 regarding, and then defining adjacency in different, like open container district this way, maybe courtyards this way, maybe defining adjacency specific to the situation. If there's no, we could talk about a bunch of different things, but legal did give us the authorization to have different meanings under different contexts for the word.
And when did you sign your lease, Meave?
March of this year.
Okay.
And we're actually on hold at the moment because of this. This just popped up the other day. So as I mentioned, we started this conversation in November with them. We signed a lease in March. I ordered the equipment because there is a 6-month lead time on a brew house, which our tanks have already arrived. I don't know if you're on social media, but we did that whole thing. And the rest of the tanks arrive, I think, in like 2 or 3 weeks. So we've got that. But it's about, I mean, it's a very capital intensive project to buy this equipment. It's all stainless, it's sanitary food grade and all that. But as far as construction and the still itself, that's on hold at the moment because of this snag here. So.
But again, does staff have some ideas or what they can bring back to us that?
So we've seen the ratios in neighboring jurisdictions be considered, so that would be leaving premise as is and considering it 2 different establishments and then mixing the ratios within the other premise. That would be the one option. Or the other option being that when you have a warrant, that premise would be defined as the building or as outlined in the warrant, if that would be allowed by legal. So that's kind of the 2 options we've seen as staff to be able to allow this and not flood into a bunch of other unanticipated.
And what's the ratio?
So the food sales in that building,
So I just was curious, is it the 50-50 or is it the 60?
so that would be whatever you guys would like it to be. Then they'd have to abide by that. 50-50 would be your eating establishment. Now, in a brewery and distillery, they have no food requirements and are allowed to have consumption on premises.
Okay.
So should you choose the mixed premise concept, they don't need to have that food at all. Only if you were to choose to have that separate ratio mixing, that then we start talking about getting them to 50-50, 60-40 kind of ratio.
Okay.
The food is an add-on to make it seem less like a bar where, you know, if even though we are a manufacturer, it would, if we didn't have that food component, it would be just all alcohol consumption there. But we are adding that to, it's better for our business, actually. If people stay and they have some ribs on, and then they can have another beer maybe. But, you know, if it's just alcohol, they might have 1 beer and they're gone. But if they're going there and they have some barbecue, they might have a second one. So it's better for us that way. It makes sense to me anyways, but with our business in Johns Creek, when we look at our sales, it'll build up until dinner time and people go. And then people come back afterwards and they have another beer. So it makes sense for breweries to do that. And the state does not have any kind of percentage requirement for food sales with that. So.
Sure.
May I ask a question? So do you sell distilled spirits in Johns Creek?
We're finalizing the ordinances now. We have our federal permit and it's a novel business to them as well. I believe they are voting on it in October and they are adopting everything that the state is as well.
I kind of thought that earlier we edited out that. So maybe I'm the only person that is confused, but
That was the tasting in the liquor stores, I think.
Oh, you edited out external, so food from another location. And we're defining it, so we talked about you're going to.
no, editing out distilled spirits in a tasting environment or anything. Are you talking?
Except for breweries and distilleries. So under the package, so I'm separating them into two
okay.
separate things. So a package store wouldn't have that, but your distillery,
Got it.
we're going to try the alcohol they're making there, we would support.
Okay. All right. I'll revisit it on my own time. Thank you.
I know you're going to watch this again.
All right. Okay, anybody else? All right, thank you for your comments.
Yeah,
Ted.
thank
Well,
you.
and again, I'll echo Councilmember Cookley's
We'll work
welcome
with
to
legal for
Milton.
the one that has the least ramifications on additional. So we've talked about before not having outside food sales, and this would be either inside food sales.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
No, thank you very much, Bernadette. And in case anyone hasn't reckoned, we're still on reports and presentations. Tammy, if you'll please call the next item.
That next item is discussion on concept development of intersection improvements for Bethany Road at Providence Road, Freemanville at Red Road, and Hopewell Road at Red Road. It's presented by Ms. Sarah Leaders.
Sarah, you have to work on your placement in the agenda next time.
Bernadette mentioned this one, the presentation wanted to pop up in front of hers and make that happen better next time. All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. So we have a presentation tonight on the concept development for 3 possible intersection improvement projects. And those are at Bethany and Providence, Hopewell and Red, and Freemanville at Red. So the agenda of this presentation is first to show how the project was identified through past planning documents and how they're funded. We'll go through the timeline related to these projects, the public input steps and summary, and then our engineering consultant will cover the details for each project for these items listed, from existing conditions to the alternatives that were considered, the recommended concept, and that's going to be as presented to both the stakeholders and in our online survey. We'll go through the survey and stakeholder summary, go over some comment themes, responses, and then optional considerations. Then finally, I'll wrap up with staff recommendations and next steps. So in general, our process for developing an improvement project is really broken out into 3 major phases. The pre-design, which is to determine the improvement. The design phase prepares plans, construction documents, and acquires the land needed. And then the final stage is to bid and construct the improvement. So tonight's discussion is to determine the next steps, as we're going to present the summary for really this pre-design stage on the 3 projects. This map shows the proximity of the 3 intersections. They are located fairly closely to each other. And then on the right, just highlight the funding associated with those. So intersection number 1 is Bethany Road at Providence Road, and that one has T-SPLOST Tier 2 funds associated with it. Intersection 2 is Hopewell at Red, and in 2017, we completed what we call a quick fix improvement, where we just added a turn lane on Red Road to separate the left and right turn lanes. The future improvements, the funds haven't been identified for how to fund a larger scale project there. And then finally, intersection 3 is Freemanville Road at Red Road, and that one also has T-SPLOST Tier 2 funds. Concept study was prepared for Hopewell at Beth Bend and Bethany Way. And as part of that, we also included Hopewell at Red Road. So we studied the operations in 2013. The recommendations that came out of that study were to really look and reevaluate those intersections with the comprehensive transportation plan that would be coming in a few years. So then in 2016, the update to the comprehensive transportation plan was approved, and it identified some of these intersections by priority. So the level 1 priority was the highest priority projects identified through that plan, and Bethany, Providence, and Freemanville at red were on that list. That also correlates to the T-SPLOST, the first project list of T-SPLOST. So the level 1 priority projects from the plan were all of the T-SPLOST projects. The level 2 priority projects from that plan were locally funded projects that could be completed in that same timeframe as the T-SPLOST. And the level 3 were future projects that could be under a future T-SPLOST referendum. So again, Bethany at Providence and Freemanville at red were both level 1. Hopewell at red, that quick fix was called out as a level 2 because it was locally funded. And then Hopewell at red, the bigger fix was a level 3. So then in 2016, the T-SPLOST was approved by voters. And on that project list in tier 2 were Bethany, Providence, and Freemanville red. Like I said, in 2017, Hopewell at red had the quick fix completed. And then in March of this year, the city approved a contract for KCI to develop concepts for these intersections. For our public input, we did two types of outreach. First were stakeholder meetings. So we identified on all 3 projects properties where the improvements indicated that we could possibly need right-of-way or easement from property owners. We sent letters to those owners and invited them to a small group meeting to talk about the projects and to hear their concerns. So we held that meeting on July 22nd. We invited 27 residents as well as the Redstone HOA. And Redstone's a subdivision that sits on the southeast corner of Freemanville and Red Road. We had 12 attendees at that meeting, and we also received additional input from 2 other stakeholder parcels. Second type of outreach we did was a online survey. So we did a 7-question survey that ran August 11th through the 28th. First question we asked was, do you live in Milton, work in Milton, or routinely travel to Milton? And 95% of our respondents do live in Milton. The next grouping of questions related to the 3 locations. So we asked, how often do you travel through this intersection? And then we provided a brief description of the proposal and asked, do you support this plan? Gave the options to answer for, against, uncommitted, or conditional. We had 500 responses to the survey. Under the description of the proposal, we also provided the opportunity to elaborate under general comments, and we got 546 additional general comments. So we had tasked KCI with developing recommended concepts to do a couple different things to first improve traffic operations, reduce delay, and enhance safety. And so with those goals in mind, KCI is going to go through all of these elements for the 3 locations, and then I'll come back up and talk about recommendations moving forward. So I'll ask Andrew Antweiler with KCI to come present on the specifics of the projects.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We have prepared some information to further explain about these 3 projects, share the concepts, and some of the feedback we've received. So our first location is Providence Road at Bethany Road, and this is an all-way stop-controlled intersection. Over the past 5 years, it's had experienced 26 crashes. And from a level of service standpoint, the amount of congestion you can see in the morning, we have a poor level of service of F. During the AM peak hour in the afternoon, rush hour, we have a level of service of D. And so we looked at 3 different improvement alternatives, which are listed there. We looked at a traffic signal, a single-lane roundabout, and a multi-lane roundabout. And so based on the traffic analysis and geometric review, we came up with this as the preferred alternative presented to the stakeholders and the public. This is the recommended opening year design, which would be a single lane roundabout. The image, you can see the north arrow is pointed up on this graphic. So Providence Road is kind of your north-south street on this graphic. And the roundabout is designed so that it's kind of pulled a little bit to the south and towards the City of Milton property to reduce impacts to the residential houses on the other corners. And one other thing you'll notice is on the southbound Providence Road, we've shown acquiring some additional right-of-way to accommodate a future improvement. So this graphic shows how in a future year, potentially 10 years out as traffic volume grows, that the roundabout could accommodate adding a second approach lane on that southbound Providence Road. And that will just handle the traffic volume that is expected to increase on that approach with minimal changes to the roundabout itself. And so this was shared at the stakeholder meeting and online, and here summarizes the feedback received. At the stakeholder meeting, 2 indicated they were for this concept and 1 was conditional. The online survey findings found that 73% were for this concept, and we received 101 comments related to this location. And the general themes were some believed that a roundabout was unnecessary at the intersection. Some respondents were in favor of the roundabout at the intersection. Some thought that there are already enough roundabouts in the city, and then some had comments about the design and some suggestions for how to improve it. And we wanted to respond to some of the comments and some of the themes we heard. And one was the question for the need for the improvement. And so the existing all-way stop control does have high delay in the AM, especially due to the school down the street along Providence Road. And so those long queues are observed, and that overall level of service is F, so that's recognizes a need. And the proposed roundabout does provide an overall level of service of B, looking 10 years out in the AM, so it's an improvement for the operations at that intersection, as well as improving the safety at that location. So moving along to Hopewell Road at Red Road, this is a stop-controlled T intersection, and the crashes at this location were 32 over a 5-year period. And the intersection level of service in the morning is level of service B, but in the afternoon, it's harder to make the left turn off of Red Road, and so you end up with a level of service which is F during the PM peak hour. So we looked at 5 different alternatives at this location. One was a traffic signal adding turn lanes. One was adding 2 turn lanes with no traffic signal, and then some variations on a roundabout. So this is the concept layout presented to the public. And in this image, the north arrow is pointing to your right. So we've kind of turned it, and Hopewell Road is traveling from left to right on your image, with Red Road coming from the north. So the recommendation here is to add a northbound left turn lane, add a southbound right turn lane, and install a traffic signal to provide traffic control. So we've minimized the impacts to the properties in the corners of this intersection. So based on the stakeholder meeting, we had responses. 1 was for, 4 were against. We had 2 that were uncommitted. We also, from our online survey, had received almost 44% were for the alternative and 39% were against. So we did receive the most comments at this location, 254. And the general themes that we heard were a lot of people were supportive of creating a roundabout at this location. Many respondents were opposed to the improvements or didn't think they were warranted at that location. Some preferred turn lanes and no traffic signal. And then some did like the improvements recommended, as long as that traffic signal was smart or designed well, and some provided some additional comments. So wanted to respond to why not a roundabout at this location. And there are some physical conditions and some utility reasons why a roundabout is not preferred. So we've listed out a couple things that are hard to really show on a graphic and show to the public. But there's a major AT&T utility located on the east side of Hopewell Road. So that limits the footprint of the roundabout without impacting that utility. The terrain at the location would require a lot of grading and impact to a pond in the corner if we were to build a roundabout. The roundabout would require a lot of right-of-way since it is a T intersection today. And two of the corner property owners stated they did not want to lose property for their horse farm or their front yard. Now, we did analyze the roundabout, and when we looked at a single-lane roundabout, it would accommodate 10 years worth of volume, however, not the 20-year volume. So we would have to design something looking more like a multi-lane roundabout, which would have a larger footprint. So we pulled the graphic that was prepared in the 2013 study, which Sarah mentioned. This was the concept which was shown in 2013, but you can see how it's a much larger footprint, and it does require more property. So that's there for information. And also wanted to respond to the question for the need for the improvement. As mentioned, that trying to make that left turn from Red Road to go north is difficult at times of the day, especially in the PM peak hour. So we have a very high delay there. And also we looked at the METCD traffic signal volume warrants. So when you have a certain amount of volume, it's a viable option to install a traffic signal, and the current volumes meet those warrants. So that's one reason why we thought that was a good alternative to recommend. Also, people asked about, could we install turn lanes and no traffic signal? And that is an option you could do. However, looking 10 years out, that really doesn't give us the capacity. It really doesn't help that left turn movement, which has the great delay. So some options we discussed at this location was we could potentially wait until the improvement at Hopewell and Bethany Bend is open to traffic, and then reevaluate the alternative that makes sense. This could be do nothing. It could be the preferred alternative. It could be adding 2 lanes and no traffic signal, or other alternatives. And then our third intersection at Freemanville and Red, this is at the other end of Red, so it's another stop-controlled T intersection. And one difference at this location is Red Road has a single-lane approach, versus at the other end, there's 2 lanes today. So the crashes at this location for a 5-year period were 21 crashes. And the level of service, you can see again in the AM, it looks okay. It's level of service B. However, in the PM, you get that poor level of service. And it's primarily people from Red Road trying to turn left or right. So improvement alternatives we looked at were a traffic signal by adding turn lanes, adding 2 turn lanes with no traffic signal, and then a single lane roundabout. This is the concept that was shared with the stakeholders and online. Once again, the north arrow is pointed to your right. So Freemanville Road is kind of left to right on your image, and Red Road approaches from the bottom of your page. The Redstone HOA subdivision is kind of to your lower left. And also Phillips Circle is a road that comes in just a little bit north of Red Road. So we looked at that area and came up with this as a preferred alternative, which includes adding a turn lane on Red Road, adding a southbound left turn lane on Freemanville Road. And also, we know that there's a speeding concern, fast-moving cars along Freemanville Road. And so the concept included adding these raised medians, raised islands, as you approach the intersection, with the idea to slow cars down as they approach. And so this would accommodate provide an operational benefit and accommodate traffic volumes, and kind of set it up so that in 5 or 10 years from now, as traffic volume grows, then if the city sees a need to install a traffic signal, it's easy to go out there and install that. But based on the current volumes along Freemanville Road, the traffic signal warrants aren't quite met. It's a little lower volume road intersection than at the other end. And so this is an example, two pictures of the thought on installing a raised island or raised median. We know that's not very common in Milton, but here's an example on your left side of the screen and on Howes Road in Roswell, and then example on Webb Road in Milton, where it could be attractive. It could be, it's like we said, meant to kind of slow people down as they approach that intersection. So at our stakeholder meeting, we received the feedback that 1 was for the alternative, 2 were against, 2 were uncommitted, and 1 was conditional. And then from the online survey findings, we had 51% were for the alternative and 21% were against, 17 were uncommitted, and 10 were conditional. At this location, we received 191 comments, and we grouped those into about 8 themes. And they ranged from those that supported the idea about installing a roundabout here as the better solution. Many people had a lot of concern about the traffic islands and the raised medians, not quite sure how that would work. And then there were some that commented on why the need for the left turn lanes, don't think there's really a need for an improvement here. And then some provided comments about the design, and some did support the proposed improvements. So we had, a range of different input. But I think the primary concern we heard here was about the idea of this raised median islands and what was the benefit of that? What was the purpose? So to respond to some of these questions, one was, the question of the need for the improvement. That westbound road, trying to make that left turn in the afternoon during the PM peak hours is tough. You have a poor level of service, and that's partly because you have that one lane approach today. We did hear some comments about the speeding on Freemanville, and we, as part of the study, collected the 85th percentile vehicle speed, which was 51 miles per hour on Freemanville Road, and the posted speed limit is 45. So when you actually look at the amount of traffic, 55% are going over the speed limit. So that it is a concern at the location. There were, some asked what was the reason for adding a southbound left turn lane on Freemanville Road. And the point is so you can provide more gaps in that southbound traffic so that people from Red Road have more opportunities to make that left turn. Some asked, what was the benefit of the turn lane on Red Road? And one of the big things is a vehicle who wants to make a right turn will now have to wait behind one car that wants to turn left, like you do today. We mentioned, there were some concerns about the raised islands, and we thought, this was a design element to help reduce speeds, and it could be designed to accommodate trailers and accommodate vehicles that would be traveling through the intersection. Did mention just a minute ago about the traffic signal and how it's not quite warranted at this point. Some people asked, could a traffic signal be installed? But it could be in the future with that geometry. And then we did look after receiving the feedback from the public about, could a roundabout be installed here? So working with Sarah, we developed a concept, which is shown here, which would be a single lane roundabout that would accommodate the traffic in the future. And this shows the rough footprint or size of that roundabout. So we developed this just to compare that to the preferred alternative just shared. And I think this is the last slide that shows some options at this location could be to move forward with a preferred alternative with the raised islands, or potentially not include the raised islands and you just have a striped out center area. Also, one option is to build that right turn lane on Red Road only. or potentially a roundabout. So one of the things we looked at was the difference in cost and the difference in operational benefit to cost ratio. So you can see that the preferred alternative has a higher operational BC ratio, and the roundabout potentially costs about twice as much as the preferred alternative. So that is for your consideration, and I'll turn it back over to Sarah.
So based on the project purposes and goals, the public input we received, these are some potential recommendations that I'd like to discuss further. So intersection 1 at Bethany at Providence, that's a typical support number that we got through our survey, 70%. I looked back at Hopewell Bethany, that was about the percentage support we got on that project for the roundabout there. So we're going to recommending to begin design on the roundabout as recommended by KCI. At intersection 2, based on the feedback we got and the current improvements underway at Hopewell at Bethany, wonder what that traffic pattern changes could be like when those intersections are improved there. So we're recommending to hold on further design and reevaluate that location in the future. Again, it wasn't identified for funding right now. We just wanted to evaluate it with these other two due to proximity. And then intersection number 3, Freemanville at Red. One idea is we could do a phased approach similar to how we did at Hopewell Red, where we go ahead and install just the Red Road separate left and right turn lanes, and then consider further improvements in the future. So tonight, just wanted to get some feedback, discuss the original recommended concepts, the options that KCI presented as well, and then the possible staff recommendations. So the next steps for those next step options for each project location could be to move forward with the design based on the recommended concept. We could modify the project concept, and that could include some possible additional outreach to get feedback on additional alternatives. We could hold on further action and reevaluate in the future, or we could remove the project from consideration. Again, back to in summary, the staff recommendations are really based on that stakeholder input and public input on the alternatives, as well as the funding and cost benefit considerations. So again, that recommendation is on intersection 1 to design the roundabout, intersection 2 to just hold and reevaluate in the future, and intersection 3, possible modified phased plan. So with that, we'll open it up for questions or discussion.
Any questions or comments, Laura?
I just have a comment. I pretty much agree with you. I just would be interested in those raised islands, just to try to do some, speed calming, just to try it, because I know on web, yeah, it's effective because it's kind of like an obstacle course. You have to slow down and make sure you don't run over them. So, and that's really an area where people pick up speed. So that would be my only comment is, I agree with the left and right turn lanes, but maybe see about the raised islands. And that's also kind of a tight turn with trailers. There's a lot of farms on Phillips and Wood Road with where trailers go in, kind of doing that right and immediate left.
I have.
Paul and
Go
then
ahead, Paul.
Carol.
Sure.
I like where you guys are going, Sarah. I think intersection 1 plan is a good one. The roundabout is, I think, what's called for there. It's rural and it's in keeping with the area. Intersection 2, Hopewell at Red. I think you're right. We should delay and see what's happening at Hopewell and Bethany. That make a huge impact difference. I think, if anything, maybe consider a northbound on Hopewell, a left-hand turn there as an interim solution at some point. But I think right now, just hold and see what happens. In Freemanville, what I didn't see in the concepts was a left-hand turn lane from Freemanville on to Red. There's no question that there's backup from Red on to Freemanville, that additional turn lane there would be hugely advantageous. But I like the idea of the raised islands, but also consider a left-hand turn lane from Freemanville onto Red. What happens there 99% of the time is people don't follow the traffic laws. Somebody's waving somebody's pausing somebody else, everybody's confused, and then there's an accident. If you introduce some of these concepts, I think you begin to take some of those personal traffic rules out of the equation and probably improve it. So just food for thought. But I like the concepts. These are all great.
And I did pull up the Freemanville Red concept with that phase 1 area hatched out. And we did show a left turn for Freemanville onto Red. And then we put an island at Phillips to not confuse, to have, opposing lefts and to really slow that turn onto
Okay.
Phillips. So that's what
I missed
That's
that.
what we had originally
This is exactly what I
proposed.
was describing. So perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Carol? Sarah, how much green space at Providence and Bethany will be consumed of the city's property?
Haven't estimated that exact number yet for the square footage.
Is it contained to the corner, or does it travel, or do you take property going south on Providence?
So the blue line, it's kind of a faint dashed line, is the existing right-of-way. So it's a similar width to this the center island from the right-of-way to the right-of-way. Do you know exactly about how far that is?
I think to answer your question is, it is the corner, but there's also be a little bit of widening along Providence, you were asking,
Mhm.
or a little bit of shifting the pavement that direction just to stay off that other residential house to the east side.
And how far down?
If I was to guess, maybe we're probably talking 300 feet. We're not going a long distance.
Okay. Another question. Do you have trackable data whether homeowners in these respective areas have been given a heads up or you've solicited their opinions?
So when we invited, on these graphics, almost any of these property owners labeled, we invited to the stakeholder meeting. So we selected adjacent property owners to that intersection, or sometime it was even the second house away from that intersection. So that resulted in, I think we had 27 invited to the stakeholder meeting for all
Okay.
three intersections.
Okay, so they came to the actual meetings.
They did. They
Okay.
came to this room in July, and we had the maps and questions they had.
Okay, and a final question on that intersection. What was that about a second lane south on Providence?
So as has been designed in some other roundabouts in Milton, the idea of having a phased design is when it's first opened, it has maybe one lane on an approach. So in this case, on Providence Road South, it would have one lane. And then as traffic grows, maybe 10 years later, you see the need for that second lane. So on Pointer. So at this location, we would add a second lane in the future when it's needed. But the geometry, everything's laid out, so it's a very small change construction-wise. But we already have the right-of-way. It's already it's laid out for that to be added at a future.
Okay, there's not a lot of room there in front of those people's house, though. That would be my concern. I mean, you're taking a significant amount of their frontage, aren't you?
Correct. It is narrow right-of-way today. So yes, it does encroach towards that house. And
Well, I mean, it doesn't encroach, it's right in there. I would just suggest that we be extreme. It's just came across as a little cavalier, and that property sits pretty close to the road. And we just need to rethink our approach on that, I think. Not, I mean, literally the approach. Thank you.
Maybe we could do a shorter approach lane that didn't start till it got beyond the house. There's a few things we could look
I mean,
at. but-
that just would be probably pretty shocking if any one of us owned that, I think.
Anybody else? Okay, no more. Thank you both for all your hard work. I know it's a lot of work, tough stuff. Okay. I don't know, do we have any public comment, Tammy?
We do not, sir, not on that item.
Okay, thanks.
Oh,
It's just about the Freelandville and Red intersection.
Ma'am, if you don't if you don't mind speaking to the microphone, state your name and address just for the record.
Yes,
Thanks.
my name is Robin Damron, and I live actually at the corner of Freemanville, where y'all are getting ready to put all that, Freemanville and Phillips. If you were to drive down Red Road and run into Freemanville, right now you can only go left or right, but my house is right there. So I'm on that drawing, that layout, and met with Mr. Antweiler, and I've gone to all the meetings. And I just want to say that I'm definitely in favor of some traffic calming issues right there. We have to do something. They fly down Freemanville. My driveway is actually, if you'll look at the layout, my driveway actually is right there going into Freemanville, and it is very hard with the way they speed down there to even, I mean, I have to like, look back and forth like 3 or 4 times before I even pull out. I'm very much in favor of a raised island there. We have to have something. You can even put speed bumps in front of my house. I just would do anything. And I have horses. So I mentioned to Mr. Atweiler at the meeting, I was not in favor of a roundabout because I was fearful. I've been the first one many times in calling 911 when people haven't crashed there. They've been in my big pasture. That is my big pasture there. And so we need something. I'm very much in favor of the turning lanes, both coming south on Freemanville to turn onto Red, and then additionally to go right onto Red, going north on Freemanville and turning right onto Red. Not in favor of a traffic light at this time. I believe maybe in about 5 years, there may be a warrant for that. If they could consider even maybe a flashing yellow signal there, just to give people a heads up, because it's very dark there. There is a light on the corner, but people just hit it and they're like, oh, I'm wide open, I'm going to White Columns or wherever, they're just zipping through there. But anyway, additionally, I have a concern because as my driveway empties into Freemanville, and I mentioned this at the meeting, I believe they're going to amend that if they do put the raised island there, because my driveway, if I were to come out as it appears now, I can only turn right, which would be going south on Freemanville. So hopefully they'll have something there to accommodate that I could actually come out and go north and then turn right onto Red. I'm just trying to make y'all aware of this. I mentioned it to him and he was like, oh no, because I said, am I going to have to move my driveway? And he said, no, don't worry about that. And then the other thing, as my big pasture is along there, I saw they have the rendering of, I think it's a blue line that showed where the present property line, I guess, is next to the side of the street. We have so much greenery there and then trees. I'm concerned, am I going to have to move my fence, my big pasture, move it back? I don't know. And also, about a year ago, I just converted from propane to natural gas. So they ran the lines. I have natural gas lines running through that big pasture very close to the fence to come up and then go towards my house. So that's another thing. Am I going to be responsible if I have to take that fence down and move it? Am I going to have to relocate those lines? No, I just have questions like that. So, but I appreciate y'all listening to me and, taking into consideration that we definitely need some traffic calming features there. Definitely. So please put the raised islands. Thank y'all for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for speaking. All right, Tammy. So we have no first presentation items. We'll move on to public hearing. If Tammy would please sound the item.
Thank you, Mayor. That item is consideration of an ordinance of the Mayor and Council of the City of Milton, Georgia, to adopt the fiscal 2022 budget for each fund of the City of Milton, Georgia, appropriating the several items of revenue appropriations, prohibiting expenditures to exceed appropriations, and prohibiting expenditures to exceed actual funding available. It's agenda item number 21273. Ms. Bernadette Harville.
Good evening. We are here for our second and final public hearing regarding the FY 2022 proposed budget. Again, this budget covers spending from October 1st, 2021 to September 30th, 2022, and all revenues collected during that time period as well. Here before you have the calendar of all the main activity that we had during this budget cycle. Back on August 9th, we held the detailed work session regarding all of the proposals. And on September 8th, we had the first public hearing where, again, we went over that in a detailed format. Tonight, I will be a little briefer and kind of hit the highlights of everything that we have proposed. You can see here the consolidated budget summary. This shows all of the funds that have budgeted requests for fiscal year 2022. And it includes citywide anticipated revenues in the amount of $53.3 million. Across 1 general fund, 4 special revenue funds, and 6 capital projects funds. Here you have the general fund budget summary, and you can see the year-over-year revenue anticipations are projected to increase by 2.5%, excluding other financing sources. Again, no requested revenue changes have occurred since the last presentations, so this is the same thing you've seen for both presentations. And we've updated the variances to reflect the FY 2021 amendments that we'll also have before you this evening and that we went over last public hearing. They were moving on to the expenditures by department. We had some changes in that from the budget workshop to the last public hearing, but nothing has been altered from the last the meeting on the 8th till today. And you have here a total request for $35.9 million, including that $9.5 million transfer out to the Capital Projects Fund for pay-as-you-go programming. When we're looking at year-to-year operating expenditures, increasing about 4%, excluding those new initiatives and the contingency. And that 4% does include the market adjustment to salaries that staff had went over in detail at the original budget workshop. At the end of the day, we are seeing a use of $1,052,886 from that fund balance in excess of what's required to have by law, going towards balancing the budget, and that will leave us with the proper fund balance to adhere to our 25% of subsequent year revenues as required by law. If anyone has any questions, I'll stop here for a moment. I won't go department by department. I know we've talked about that before, and it's also in the presentation that's online for everybody. Again, we will have a detailed digital budget book this year that staff is working diligently on. It will have enhanced features, including performance metrics of how we're aiming to measure using these dollars across the different goals that we have set through the strategic planning process, as well as department goals and initiatives. So you'll be able to see all kinds of additional details supporting that information, and we'll track those through the digital transparency portal throughout the year to show progress on that. Just wanted to key in again one more time on the new initiatives, that they are outside of what we are normally operating and doing within the city. We have requests within human resources supporting trying to recruit and maintain positions in the harder to maintain positions, including certified police officers and firefighter paramedics. The referral fees would go to current staff who recommend those who get hired and stay on with us, and the sign-on incentive would go towards the staff that were hired on. We have the marketing and branding consultant and equestrian marketing campaign coming straight from the strategic plan, going towards showing everyone outside of Milton how wonderful Milton is and why to come here. And that would be utilizing a consultant to do that with a proper marketing strategy. A court bailiff, reducing the costs from using certified staff to having a court bailiff dedicated to doing the fingerprinting and certain activities within the court to help over there. We have the asset control system, an actual locker system that is digital to be able to track who has what extra spare equipment and when they return it, so that is easily trackable and able to find. Reclassifying the accreditation manager from sergeant to lieutenant and giving them additional responsibilities at that command level. 3 full-time employees for traffic enforcement personnel, creating a traffic enforcement contingency within the officers division. And those will be dedicated towards traffic enforcement unless there was some other larger concern that came up within the city that they'd have to be pulled off of that, but otherwise they'd be fully dedicated to traffic. And then filtrating officer training software, looking at a program to be able to more clearly track all the training that goes on with those new officers that come on board. In the fire department, they have several initiatives across improving outcomes and survivability. We have the public safety green space access. This is the components that would go towards the ATVs that you'll see later in Capitol that can go into the trails and more off-road spaces that we have to save anybody that needs help out there on those trails. The Resilient Community Executive Training Initiative through the Harvard cooperative that we will be working on to get people trained. The Blue Card Incident Command certification using similar language on every command, on every scene, so there'd be consistency and increased survivability. Accreditation to get best practices and ensuring that we are following all of those procedures. The GlideScope Go video endotracheal intubation laryngoscope, which is a piece of equipment that has increased success upon first attempt, as opposed to multiple attempts doing a manual intubation. The Milton Cares Paramedic Program staffing. So the department has come up with this CARES program, hoping to ensure reduced visits to the emergency room and also follow up with the patients that come home, making sure they're taking their medications properly and not having to go back to the hospital. And that program would be done through current staffing. This is just funding to go towards paying those overtime hours that would come out of potentially having the non-on-duty officers attend to those patients. In Public Works, we have an infrastructure inspector. Again, contingent upon looking at T-SPLOS 2, Sarah Litas and her team have determined that having someone on staff would be more affordable than having to have an outside third party do those inspections. In Parks and Recreation, we have parking lot preservation, looking to extend the life of the parking lot at FMCC and Bell Memorial Park instead of having to repave right away. And then finally, we have a 70-30 split for a development engineer within the Community Development Department and Public Works Department to handle transportation and community development engineering needs. Again, currently that it was a full-time position a part-time position budgeted through a third-party contractor. This is looking to move it to a full-time position with a staffed person. I ran through that fairly quickly, so I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone has regarding those new initiatives. We have our special events funds. This is moving out of the general fund area, moving on to those special revenue funds. Looking year over year at not quite too much of a drastic change. Again, we've had for the last 2 years reduced events due to COVID and other kinds of cancellations, looking to bring that back to, I have this already at the event. This is the summary. Looking to bring that back to more of a full-scale events programming for the year. Asking for funds from the general fund and about $80,000 transferred over to supplement what we're currently seeing from the hotel motel taxes that have decreased since the impact from the COVID-19 pandemic. We have the confiscated assets fund. At this time, there have been no identified projects. If they are, we'll come before you with an amendment to set a budget for those items. The E911 fund, 100% of those funds collected go towards the city of Alpharetta to support our share of the E911 center and the dispatchers over there. In the operating grant fund, we have the current CARES money that was transferred in to cover expenses we had in FY 2020, so that's not going to recur, so nothing budgeted for FY 2022. Should the police department's grant continue into FY 2022, we will move that through a budget amendment. And then the final one we have here is the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, as we're more familiar with calling it. This is the federal funding coming through that we're slated to get $14.8 million. At this time, we don't have final guidance. So we are just recognizing the revenues. Once we do have final guidance, we'll come before you to have an approved plan on how to spend those funds. The one project we have currently outlined, potentially sending these funds to, is the build out of the new active park complex once a property is identified. So you'll see that in the CIP details. Any questions regarding?
Any guidance on when they're going to give us direction from the federal government on how we have the funds? When are we going to find out how we can use them?
They have interim guidance, and some cities are moving forward on the interim guidance, but we have just been advised to wait on to final guidance since this is a large sum of money. I have not seen any dates. Have you seen any?
GMA was originally saying that they were expecting it late fall, so I'd assume we'll hear something soon.
Okay.
And then moving on to our capital projects funds, again, we have the main capital projects fund, which is primarily funded through that pay-as-you-go programming, our green space bond fund. We have $5 million left on the green space bond fund, give or take, to purchase land with. The rest of the money in that fund goes towards paying off the debt service through the separate millage rate that was approved. We have the T-SPLOST fund, continuing collections through FY 2023 at this time, and finishing out the projects that were outlined specifically in that referendum. If we go to a T-SPLOST 2, that will be shown separately. This is all still T-SPLOST 1 information. Our capital grant fund, finishing out some of those grants at Providence Park. We have the impact fees. Again, those are collected from the developer going towards a specific project laid out in the CIE. In January or after around that time, we're looking to bring back the methodology for that before you to ensure that we have all the current projects accounted for within those impact fees. And then finally, the revenue bond fund, where we have public safety complex completed, and Station 42 will be built out of this fund, as well as the alerting system that was completed. Also, the debt service for those bonds are maintained within that fund through a transfer out from the operating grant fund, or sorry, from the general fund. Stop there for a second. I will just highlight on our pay-as-you-go program, since that's kind of interest typically to everybody. This highlights specifically in FY 2022 in the gray column, what funds will go directly towards which projects from pay-as-you-go funding straight from the general fund. So primarily we have here pavement management is the largest one typically that's coming out of that funding. We have the completion of some of the, or continuing funding for some of the work over at Providence Park, returfing at Bell Memorial, Cox Road, looking at returfing those fields as well, potentially putting in tennis courts depending on council's final guidance. Former Milton Country Club finishing out the phases for the active side over there, so the building improvements and things like that. And then again, the active park, the new athletic complex once we identify a piece of land for that. On the passive side, we have some money going towards starting to fund the Birmingham Park plan and continuing the trails and the other hydrology improvements out on the passive side. Does anyone have any questions?
Questions?
So finally, we have, I apologize, wrong page number. The new capital initiatives. So again, these are those vehicles that go along with the 3 full-time employees for the traffic enforcement. We have the Auto Pulse, which is a piece of equipment that will be utilized to improve survivability on cardiac arrest scenarios. The fixed cascade system, looking to get one in the north side and one in the south side. One would be funded hopefully through a grant, the other one through this funding, should you approve it, to be able to refill the bottles for their breathing apparatus. Again, the ATVs that go along with that public safety green space access initiative. And then 2 public works requests, one for Lower Hopewell traffic calming, making that approach into Alpharetta look a little more Milton, and also slowing down the traffic as people are coming into Milton from that side. And finally, the slope landscaping at the Thomas Bird House, looking to kind of terrace that so it'll be, the washaway won't happen as often. Those are the main highlights. I know we went into details before. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the budget. This would be just a public hearing, and later this evening we will vote to potentially approve or amend this.
Any questions right now?
Many times as we've been over it, no, Bernadette, I have no questions.
That was only like,
I appreciate you listening.
that was only like 30 of 172.
I-
That means there's 140.
ready
That's
for a
really
motion?
trimmed down from the 200 something last year, so we're doing good.
All right. We don't have any public comments. I'll close the hearing on this. So, no items on the zoning agenda or unfinished business, so we'll move on to unfinished business. Tammy, could you please call?
Mayor, that item is consideration of an ordinance to amend Chapter 4, Alcohol Beverage Licenses in Appendix A of the Milton Code of Ordinance to update and clarify requirements for the craft beer and/or wine market license. It's agenda item number 21271. Bernadette.
Good evening again. So before we kind of went into this broader discussion about looking at Chapter 4 as a whole, we had some concepts come before us that seemed like they may be appealing to the council, and we brought before you some specific edits to the craft beer and wine market license. Again, I'm on a little bit of a delay, so once that pulls up, I will show you what those are. We did have, in the meantime, I'll discuss one more piece of feedback I believe the council had received from a citizen opposed to the changes, stating that they believed it was still like a bar. Now, I just wanted to clarify, if we don't change anything to 60/40, it still remains as primary use, which could be interpreted as 51%. So this would be, making a little more towards that retail side. And I'm going to just go straight to the actual edits. So again, the recommendation would be to add in some language that would clarify what primary purpose is. So we're taking that current use of a on-site package consumption retailer and expanding that to also include some potentials of other types of sales of food, whether they be prepared on site or be groceries to go, in conjunction with the ratio of 60/40 to the consumption on premises. Looking at having in addition to that, the percent of sales. So you'd have the floor space and the sales as a dual consideration, in addition to that clarification of what types of things could be sold on that 60% side. And should council approve that, that would be, we had some pricing changes that would go along with that, making it 60%, 40% of the actual consumption as opposed to it being just a set fee. So it kind of make more sense with the ratios to go along with the percentage of what we'd be charging them for consumption. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I know we went over a lot of things that may make you think about this in a different light at this point. We had that city food market, which is very similar, but had even greater restrictions and no packaged consumption. So we're looking at that as well and the other changes.
So Bernadette, does this fit well within the changes that we discussed earlier in terms of there's nothing that we discussed earlier that's going to somehow torpedo the changes that we put in here?
No, the only thing I can potentially say that we've discussed is if you would like to consider it not being tied to this package sale piece. Right now it lives like that, so we edited that one. Because the two concepts before us have package sale pieces involved. So we would in no way have to blow this up. We could potentially down the line broaden this to not be so specific and be the ratio aspect and kind of change the name on it a little, but it wouldn't change anything about the current license establishments or the ones that are pending. So we have one currently licensed and two pending.
Okay. Anybody else? Do we have any public comment on this?
We do, Mayor. We have two.
Okay.
I'd like to invite Mr. Greg Kronk to the podium. Sure, absolutely. This is Mary Kronk.
Topic, and you're all so tired. My name is Mary Crunk, and my husband Greg and I live at 600 Hickory Mill Lane in the Birmingham area in Milton. We bought our house here in Milton over 2 years ago, and we looked around all over. What we really thought about was, where could you go within an hour of downtown Atlanta where you would find, in the same city, bucolic pastures, you find the most horse farms in Georgia. We've got gravel roads, 200-acre wooded park. We have blissful, peaceful, quiet neighborhoods, and we have the safest city in Georgia. We have a hugely unique area here. And what we really want to make sure of is that we listen to what folks in Milton really want, what our residents want. And based on our 2040 comprehensive plan, I think it was pretty clear that our residents, while we enjoy having beer and wine with our meals, I think the majority of us are not in favor of having bars in Milton. And with all the discussion you've had, this is so complex. My hats go off to you with this one. But I really, really want to encourage that we do think so closely about this, because what you're considering now really impacts the future of Milton, impacts the lifestyles that we have. For many of us, we moved here because we didn't want the lifestyle of Alpharetta or Roswell or Johns Creek. If we did, we would have moved there. Really, really want to encourage you, and thank you very much for all your work on this. It is a very slippery slope, but thank you for your diligence in working with the staff to really, let's not have bars. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Tammy, if you please call the next speaker.
Mr. Greg Kronk.
Good evening. I'm Greg Kronk, and thankfully I also live at 600 Hickory Mill Lane in Birmingham. Just kind of want to back up whatever Mary said. Absolutely. I'd also say that with this revision that we're talking about doing here, it sounds very good saying we're going to have 60-40 and this is what it's going to be. But one thing I don't see is how are you going to audit that? Who's checking that out? Where's the enforcement? And there is none. Somebody can come in and you'll get way beyond that and we'll never know. And that's my biggest concern. It's great to write a lot of really well-crafted rules and regulations, but without enforcement, it doesn't do anything for us. I would say that, as Mary said, when we first moved to Milton, I know when I first got here, I heard keep Milton, Milton so often I thought that was an official city slogan. But what I'm so afraid of, but at the same time, I've also heard tonight that we've got concepts coming in that are going to be like Avalon and Shops of Buckhead. Well, I don't know do we really want to be Avalon? Do we really want to be Alpharetta? How many people in Milton want to be like Buckhead? Not me. So I would ask that you guys create some good standards. I know what we heard Ms. Bernadette talk about. Boy, you got your work cut out for you. Create some really good standards for us because, as my good friend Bob says, developers are lined up at the door. We don't have to settle. We don't have to settle for development. So create really good standards for us, then please, please, please stand by those standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey, do we have any more? Is that all the public?
That
comment?
concludes the public comment, Mayor.
Okay.
I need to clarify one thing really quickly. I apologize that Bob reminded me of. There was a request from staff to make sure we exclude the storage. So should this be voted on, I would ask that when you make your motion, if you would consider removing from the definition that storage could be considered in the 60%. We're looking when you walk into the visible space for that 60% to be retail from a staff perspective.
Okay. And so I'm going to close the public hearing on it. I have a question just in general, Bernadette, when we talk about 60-40 and tracking the numbers and auditing them, how does that typically work with, other restaurants and whatnot?
We have reporting that we require from the excise tax perspective. So but we could ask for it in general. So we can expand that reporting that we ask for. We do have by right in the ordinance, the right to audit. So we could explore doing more periodic audits, if that would be the direction. Typically in the past, it would have been if someone was complaining about something that we would go in and look into something like that. We have never had a complaint that led to the need for an actual audit, but we could certainly work those in through the laws we already have in place.
And from the the floor space perspective, I apologize. We would get that from the initial plan that would come in, and then we inspect. The fire marshal goes in and inspects these yearly. And I doubt that we don't have this kind of operation currently, but going forward, we could add that to the inspection. Just a possibility.
Paul?
Bernadette, just to clarify what I heard you say about the auditing and the excise tax today, how is it just reported annually?
Monthly, for those that sell by the drink and for the wholesalers. So we get a listing from the wholesalers of who they're selling to and how much quantities. Then we get from those who sell liquor by the drink. But we could always ask for additional reporting in general from across all of them who are serving to do such. It tells us from food and then their ratios and then how much taxes they owe us. And we can work on those forms in any way to gather more information. So that'd be like a soft audit.
Yeah,
And then we could do an actual books audit if we needed to.
And availability of the information monthly is pretty remarkable. If there was a concern, you actually could nip it in the bud pretty quickly.
We have about 60-something businesses altogether that have alcohol beverage licenses. So it's not like an absolute tremendous undertaking to be able to do that, expand it from the excise tax perspective.
Okay, thank you. And the second question, with regard to the floor space, I want to make sure I understand that with the storage. If it's 60/40 and you're suggesting that the storage come out of the 60%?
Be excluded. So before we were kind of the scenarios we were thinking about from a staffing perspective was someone coming in and potentially having large refrigerated spaces, large dry storage that they're counting towards retail as storing the items that would be for sale. So when you walk in, you're still walking into what appears to be a bar. So making the exclusion of storage would be when you walk in, you see actually 60% of that visible floor space being dedicated to retail sales for off-premise consumption or food or prepared food and meals. So the kitchen and things like that could count, but not necessarily those refrigerated spaces and those dry goods storage.
Okay, so yeah, so just to make sure, doubly sure by saying it back to you again. So by taking that out, it's not encouraging a bar atmosphere.
We're doing
because you're
everything we
making it
can to try to
dedicated-
tailor it in further. So we just had some idea that potentially someone could come in with a lot of storage and go, you know, when you walked in, you still walked in and said, I'm only seeing a bar. We could talk about making the actual bar a certain percentage like we have under the ancillary section. There's a ton of things we could do further upon the extra, things we're looking into. So should you not be ready to pass this, I can definitely look into additional restrictions on that as well.
I'm done for now.
Okay, so when you go in, you can buy craft beer or wine, and what prohibits you from drinking what you buy there?
That is laws within that package store rules where you can't buy what you have. So where it's not bring your own beverage, right? So you have to buy from them the items. So they would have a retail sales for pour by the drink menu, and then they would have a package menu, and you can't take your package item and then open it because they're not a BYOB.
Okay, so I just want to, so within our own city, who is going to, check that? What department checks that? I mean,
So the way it's written, our police department has the enforcement capabilities at this time. And we've spoken about, we have a tool, a mapping tool that will allow, we have to get it updated once all the laws are in place, where the police department could go up to there if they had a complaint or had a concern, could see what they're licensed for, and then drill down into the ordinances that support what they're licensed for to know what exactly they could and should be doing in that establishment and enforce as such.
So if you're drinking on the premises, you're going in, and so it has to be poured. And are you required to sit in a certain area? The retail section is retail, and then.
Yep, so they would have a seating area that would be for food or meals. So the concepts we see, there is seats, and some of them will have tables and some have a bar space. So we can tailor that however needs to be fit. And within it, we're seeing a lot of the concepts where the shelving and things they're kind of mixing a little bit. So you have tables over here, then maybe some retail between and some tables over there. Maybe it's not all in one exact section. We could require that, but some of the concepts we don't have that. And you have a kitchen in one of them, and between is kind of the displays for the off-premise consumption. Maybe bottles of wine would be right between there, and then a tables at either side.
And so is this, how many of these, this concept, have we thought about how many of these types of retail outlets or consumption on that makes up, what makes a good mix within, something like Crabapple? Is that to your discretion, or how are we going to, I mean, if this becomes wildly popular,
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a popular
I know it's
concept,
gonna
and
be
that's why we
popular.
were pushing for the warrant, because this way staff can really sit down and analyze how many of these are coming in, and then bring it back to council and have the discussion, show the maps, show where things are coming in, and say, listen, what do you think? Get some feedback from you all. And then we go back and whether or not they're abutting residential properties or adjacent to schools and things like that. So we can really start to look at these from a logistic standpoint of exactly where they are and how many there are. And whether they're on second floors, they're, elevated, they could be possibly elevated within a building too, because we have high buildings coming in too. So there's a lot of options that are coming out that we couldn't possibly predict right now on what the market's going to bear. But as it comes in, I think staff would really take a good hard look at it and say, how many of these do we have? And keep reporting back to council on what's happening out there and what the demand is and where things are coming in, so we can come back and really make sure we regulate it properly.
That's why I'm double check. So approving this allows y'all for a warrant, not by
No.
We
right.
don't have a warrant within this
Ah.
particular one. This is just beer and wine, and typically our warrants are the liquor selling side.
But
From a
you-
zoning perspective, we can do all kinds of things with the warrant, which have to go through planning commission, right, to change chapter 64?
Yeah.
There'd just be a little bit more of a process should you want to go down that route.
No, I mean, I'm in favor of this concept. I like the warrant aspect on a lot of this stuff, just because, we're having some growing pains here, and it kind of just prevents some stuff that we weren't anticipating, because I know this is for a business that's going into Crabapple, signed the lease a while ago. I think they're going to be great. So I don't want to prevent them from getting in there, but I think it's important that we do have that warrant, so we just puts that extra bit of, so we don't have any issues,
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
So how
How would
So-
that process work?
So are we looking towards the potential of having anything that would not be a standard consumption 50/50 golf course, and that maybe potentially wanting it by warrant? Is that what we're talking at that level?
What would you suggest?
Well, we were just talking about that. Those would be your establishments that you may have concerns about, right? So anything that's not doing a restaurant that everyone envisions as a traditional eating place, we can look at that. It would put these on hold, the two concepts on hold until that was properly done, which takes a few months. The only other option would be that if you approve this and then we put a moratorium potentially and move forward with that
So
future ones.
So if you were going to move towards a warrant process, that's going to be chapter 64.
Right.
And it's different. Obviously, it's different from alcohol. I don't know where in the process they've gotten this far, and I don't know what they've already gotten by virtue of our current zoning. We don't have a moratorium on anything like that. If we were going to put a moratorium in place, we could do so if the council chose to do so. But we can't confuse this with chapter 4.
That's right.
Chapter 4. So if this was something the council wanted to see get added under the form-based code to become under a warrant, let's say in T5 and T4 open and maybe T6 in Deerfield, we could do so, but that process would be starting at CZM and moving through the process.
Well-
And I don't know if it would affect the current.
The
The
issue is
current.
I know the current people because I'm in the same building as them, and I mean, they've been building out for a while, and they're probably gonna be ready to open within 30 days.
If I heard the
But
council.
let me ask, 'cause just from what I'm hearing, I mean, obviously, the reason we're talking about this, because we don't know what the future is and how many applications, how many more we would have. Plus, the people that have already applied, I'm
Yeah.
thinking they'd probably be under the old code. But is this something, if we pass this now, the applications that are already in could open or whatever, but then immediately we go to the next route where we change section 64 to have a warrant moving forward?
We
Is
can
that
absolutely do
an
that.
option?
That was exactly what I was going to recommend. It wouldn't affect this current one. I don't think that's what I'm hearing is council's concern. It would be the proliferation of these types of establishments, and we'd be able to move forward and get that in under 6.4. If we were concerned that we would see something come in prior to that, we could always put a moratorium in place. And I don't know that we have any. I haven't heard of any other plans coming in.
We have 3 current concepts that are on hold, 2 that would comply with this, 1 that still wouldn't currently comply with this, but are working towards getting into compliance with this. Then if you put a moratorium, then we would have a complete hold until we get through those process to start considering any additional applications.
Understood. So those were the 3 that we discussed, I think, at the last meeting or the meeting before.
One of those.
And so beyond that, we could start putting this through the text amendment process.
In those 3 concepts that are before us right now that are in process, you've had significant time to measure those? Are the concepts that we need to be worried about in terms of the way the discussion has gone this evening or in the last meeting? Or are they such that you're pretty confident with, given the current restrictions, it's probably appropriate for those 3 or not? And should we be comfortable proceeding?
The 2 that have come in,
I know, yeah.
there's 2 that came in that I think would be okay. The 3rd one hasn't really complied yet, so
Okay,
that one I'm a little apprehensive about.
okay.
Yeah, so I definitely would want to pursue the warrant. I mean, and part of the reason is, we have been so careful in Milton in our existing establishments, that have these small bars that are part of Milton. We need to be respectful of their business as well, and what they have complied with for all these years. So, I would hate to see something like this just overwhelm our city and become what we are known for when we work so hard to have great eating establishments with, small bars that are not the primary reason that people go there. So I'm definitely in favor of pumping the brakes. I mean, I understand that people have applied, but as we go forward.
And so should any of those not be in compliance, we have the process to remove a license as well. So just to keep that in mind as the fail-safe.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is council okay with possibly, consider moving forward with this, but then directing staff to look into the warrants and the process that would be to add warrants to these type of applications.
So if one of the 3 or any of the 3 were to be problematic, what's the timeline where we would have the ability to review that? Is it a year from now, or is it?
We have a process that would include a public hearing and notification and things like that. So I would say it would at least be a few months, maybe like a month or so. I forget the exact timeline, but it has to be proper notification.
So it depends on what we're talking about by problematic.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what it is yet.
If we think it's a nuisance,
Right.
then we have a process in place where it comes before council for a revocation of the license. If we think it's something that just isn't a good fit for the city of Milton, that would be a yearly thing on the review of Chapter 4.
And so that would be a year from now, with the fact that these have just been approved. They wouldn't be subject to our October, November timing right now for review and for a granting of the license again in January. They would be a year from now, probably.
Well, you're not stuck to any timeline of when you can change these. If you voted it in tonight and then a month from now you wanted to change it again, you could. It's just so long as it's whatever regulations we grant the license under, which is at the end of the year.
Right. Yeah, we just don't want to make a mistake.
Okay, I think this is a good path to put the brakes on, but not stop existing progress. But. Okay, are there any other, did we have any more public? No, I think I closed the public hearing on this.
You did.
So, and also I know Bernadette, staff had recommended a change if someone makes a motion to support this.
So just to clarify, it would be to exclude storage from the floor plan space calculation altogether. So we were just exclude storage from the floor.
Okay. All right, is there anything else? I'll open up for a motion on this item.
Mayor, would like to make a motion to approve agenda item number 21-271 with staff's recommendation to exclude the storage from the floor space calculation.
Second.
I have a motion for approval as read by Councilmember Jameson with staff's recommendations and a second by Councilmember Cookerly. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, so Tammy, if you'd please call the next item.
Mayor, that item is consideration of an ordinance of the mayor and council of the city of Milton, Georgia, to adopt amendments to the fiscal 2021 budget for each fund of the city of Milton, Georgia, amending the amounts shown in each budget as expenditures, amending the several items of revenue appropriations, prohibiting expenditures to exceed appropriations, and prohibiting expenditures to exceed actual funding available. It's agenda item number 21272. Ms. Bernadette Harville.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So before you, we have the FY 2021 amended budget. We went over these amendment requests in detail at the public hearing that was on September 8th. The amendments prior to this were approved on May 10th, so this is based on building off of those amendments, and they are representing adjustments resulting from current circumstances, opportunities, and recommendations from staff. Again, before you, the general fund budget summary. You'll see current anticipated revenues for fiscal year 2021 at $34.7 million. Which includes that $1.65 million from the one-time transfer of CARES Act grant funding. There's an increased request of $948,292 projected revenues being proposed, which will result in $35.6 million in general fund revenues for FY 2021. Going down to the expenditure summary, you will see a current 2021 budget at $38.95 million with a proposed amendment in the amount of $605,419, which will result in an overall expenditure budget of $39.6 million for fiscal year 2021. These requested amendments include a decrease of $412,558 to operations, including a release of $236,217 from contingency, which will be reallocated in FY 2022. And a transfer out to the Capital Projects Fund in the amount of $1,017,977, of which $17,977 will be transferred to the Police Vehicle Replacement Reserve to account for the sales from surplus vehicles, and $1 million towards the development of that new active park complex we have spoken about this evening once the site has been identified. So once we take all of these amendments into consideration, the ending fund balance is projected at $9,182,040, which does put the city in line with compliance for the 25% of subsequent years' revenues for the fund balance. I will be happy to answer any questions. I won't go into any of the details as we went into those specific details for the adjustments last meeting.
Any questions?
No.
Excellent. So moving on to those special revenue funds. Within the confiscated assets fund, the department did have an identifiable expense that was compliant, so that is moving the budget to set it up to cover that training expenditure. In the operating grant fund, again, recognizing the grant received by the police department for de-escalation training. And then in the American Rescue Plan Act fund, just looking to recognize the revenues that the city received back over the summer towards those projects. Here we have the capital projects funds, and I will go over these this way. Looking to receive that money in from the general fund in the amount of $1.02 million, again, towards the active park complex and the police reserve. Also recognizing Fulton County IGA funding for water improvement at the Northeast Crabapple project. That project is contained within the T-SPLOST fund, so in a moment you'll see that being transferred right out to that fund. It just has to be recognized in this fund. We also have moving out some funding from the Providence Park account and the Cox Road account. In Providence Park, we're just moving that money from the Capital Projects Fund over to the Capital Grant Fund to account for the city's portion of those projects, being the trail and the pier improvement. At Cox Road, looking to correct the way we utilize impact fees, which will utilize a greater portion on the turfing as opposed to the original purchase. So that's just a correction to be able to utilize a greater percentage of impact fees. There's a recognition of that $1 million coming in from the general fund, and then releasing contingency again to be utilized again in 2022. So that is our capital projects fund. Here in the T-Splost Fund, recognizing that sales taxes have been coming in higher than we anticipated, so recognizing an increase of $415,000 to the Transportation Local Purpose Option Sales Tax account, and then also reducing the investment income as we're still not receiving as much as we had anticipated on that end. So rates have not come back. Recognizing that transfer in from the Capital Projects Fund and applying it to the Northeast Crabapple Project for that IGA funding from Fulton County. In the Capital Grant Fund, once again, taking the LMIG additional funds for the Safety Action Plan, putting them towards traffic calming. Sarah Leaders and her team are identifying exactly what we can utilize those funds for, and they may be broader than just specifically traffic calming, so those will go into specific projects as she identifies them. The park and trail expansion and the site improvements at the Lake Pier again being recognized for the city's portion of those grant projects as they came in a little higher than we originally anticipated. In the impact fees fund, we left the revenues as is. As we go to look at the methodology, things may change, but for now we are just doing an operating transfer in of that $420,492 to correct that Cox Road funding. And that is the end of the amendments for FY 2021. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Any questions? Any public comment on this?
We do not.
Okay, I'll close the hearing and then I'll open up for any comments or motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion, please, that we pass agenda item number 21-272 as read.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion for approval from Councilmember Cookerly with a second from Councilmember Morig. Any comments? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. All right, if our city clerk could please call the next item.
That final item is consideration of an ordinance of the mayor and council of the city of Milton, Georgia, to adopt fiscal 2022 budget for each fund of the city of Milton, Georgia, appropriating the several items of revenue appropriations, prohibiting expenditures to exceed appropriations, and prohibiting expenditures to exceed actual funding available. Agenda item number 21273. Wrap us up, Bernadette.
Final stretch. Okay, this is the request for our proposed budget for FY 2022. We just went over it in detail in the public hearing. I put up on the screen for you to review the consolidated budget summary so you can see each fund and what those requests were for revenues and expenditures, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Sure. Could you review this in detail?
I could.
Before Rick, after
Later.
Just kidding.
Take the copy home. All right, do we have any public comment?
We do not.
All right, I'll close the hearing and I'll open up for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve agenda item number 21-273.
Second.
All right, I have a motion for approval, Councilmember Morig, with a second from Councilmember Moore. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Going on vacation.
Cadet, congratulations. You worked very hard on this
Fine.
and you went to a
I
lot of
appreciate it.
trouble
And our
to
staff is here this evening to support. They put in a ton of
Your
work.
staff was wonderful and you explained it in great detail at all our meetings.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
I'm going to move on real quickly to reports. Does council have anything they want to report on?
One.
Paul?
I'd just like to take a moment and call out some of our most illustrious members of our city employment, and that is one member in particular, now Sergeant, then Detective Christopher Bradshaw, who participated in the, actually, as a family, we experienced the home invasion 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, and the process worked. It was because of the terrific detective work by Detective Bradshaw at the time, now Sergeant, and his staff. And I apologize for not remembering all the names of the officers that responded that night, but they handled us with kid gloves, took very good care of us. They really checked the scene, and through their due diligence, they made it aware up and down the eastern seaboard of what the particular MO of those criminals. They were actually caught a couple days later up in the Baltimore area. This made front page news of the Boston paper because there were over 20 homes that were invaded up there over a period of time prior to their 3 incidents in Milton. All three incidents in Milton were resolved in the last couple of weeks. Not only were they caught, but it was a multi-million-dollar, multi-state series of events that took place. They were put in jail 3.5 years ago. They were all found guilty last week in Baltimore and will be charged accordingly. But it was the work of Detective Bradshaw in particular that called it out, where it was 6 months later when they figured out the MO of these guys, they were able to tie it back to Milton. And had it not been for the hard work of our Milton police officers, it would not have been tied back together. So superior work by our law enforcement. We know we reside in a very safe city. Couldn't be prouder of the work that our team does on our behalf. And I was, at the time, of course, not in an elected position, but feel very, very rewarded as a citizen that we have the kind of service that we do from our officers.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to ask Chief Austin to come out and give us a report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, and thank you for bringing that out. That was excellent work, and we're going to try to get that word out a little bit through our media as well. So thank you for that. On the crime front, property crime down overall from this time last year, 8%. Overall crime down 5%. We are up by 1 report on crimes against persons. On the crash front, we are down 6% from our previous 3-year average, and that which includes a 19% drop year to date at the same time frame, 19% drop in injury crashes. So things are going in the right direction there. Out in the community, officers between August and thus far in September attended the Crabapple First Baptist Community Cookout, had a community officer speak at a meeting of the Milton High School football team, presented an award to a class at Summit Hill Elementary, conducted an officer-friendly program with the students at Milton Montessori, and also last week we began a new session of the Citizens Police Academy. We also recently hosted an Alive at 25 teen driving course, and we were very honored to have participated in the 9/11 Remembrance Ceremony at Milton High School. And some great news, and help Sergeant Noblet come up. On Thursday, July 15, seems like a long time ago, I, Sergeant Noblet, and Captain Barstow attended a virtual Commission on Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies, or CALEA, hearing regarding our status as an accredited agency. This process occurs every 4 years. Earlier this year, the Milton Police Department underwent a very stringent and intensive analysis by assessors from across the country to determine if we were meeting national best practices. The very intensive review consisted of analyzing our policies and procedures, observing interactions with the community, interactions with other law enforcement agencies, as well as interdepartmental relationships. Additionally, the assessors examined our proofs of compliance, conducted interviews with staff, facilitated a virtual public town hall meeting with community members, and hosted a private call-in session for anyone who wished to provide anonymous feedback. There are 180 CALEA standards that we must comply with for our national accreditation, which covers topics such as use of force, personnel and legal matters, patrol functions, communications, and property and evidence. We're very happy to report that the Commission voted unanimously to reaccredit the Milton Police Department for an additional 4 years. They found 0 issues with our agency's policies, practices, and procedures, and we were subsequently awarded this frame certificate, which we will proudly display at the Milton Police Department. I'd like to personally thank Sergeant Noblet here, who spearheads our state and national accreditation initiatives. Our assigned accreditation assessor was very complimentary of Sergeant Noblet's work throughout the process, and Sergeant Noblet represented the city of Milton and the Milton Police Department in a very positive light. So thank you, Sergeant Noblet. So there's our 4-year accreditation. And that's our report tonight, unless there are any questions.
I'll just add, I know when going through the process to get accredited, accreditation, they interview me as well as, not that I know a whole lot about the police side, but and police work, but the interviewers also have very positive things to say about our department and our city. So
Very nice.
Thank you very much.
thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Sam, if you want, we can wait another night. Just wait all night.
It's not the fall accreditation and the Bernadette show for the evening, but I'll give it a quick shot.
Don't worry, we've learned a long time. After you spoke for about 3 minutes, people quit listening. So it doesn't matter.
Just want to talk about a few statistics of what's going on in and some of the things going on in HR. As far as employee retention goes, we've lost about 19 employees year to date, and including 3 of them to retirement. A little more concerning is that 6 of those 19 were with the city for a year or less. A lot of them just simply weren't necessarily a good fit. There's very short turnover in several positions that we've had, and they realized that and left the city's employment pretty quickly. Projecting forward, we're looking at a retention rate of about 84% this year, which would be down from 87 in 2020. Bob brought out some new employees earlier tonight. HR also has a new human resources manager. A new CISC joined our staff full-time last week. She comes over from Sandy Springs, having managed their payroll system over there. She brings about 20 years of experience, including having worked at ADP and local governments in both compensation and benefits. So I'm excited to have her on board. Recruitment, we mentioned we've lost 19 employees. We filled about 22 positions, so that includes all the positions that we lost. Plus, we worked on about 3 internal placements that we've had this year. Our LeaderGov training is going well. We have a poll out to our employees and our supervisory group to help us guide where the program goes from here. We've been with LeaderGov for about a year, so we're looking forward to how we can look at changing and amending our process for the next year going forward. And finally, next week, we're going to bring in 2 speakers, both with very heavy public safety backgrounds, to talk with all of our employees about workplace stressors, recognizing signs of anxiety and depression in the workplace, suicide prevention, and how to find competent mental health resources. So that's all I have for my report. Any questions?
Questions for Sam?
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for everybody being here. I know it's been a long night, so. All right. With that, if there's nothing else, I'll open up for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous.